Chapter 1149. That person hugged her very skillfully and did not touch her wound at all. Yet, he held her firmly in his arms as if he was hugging a treasure that he had lost and regained. She felt dizzy and had a feeling that she was about to fall into the abyss. Her hands and feet were cold as if her soul was gradually leaving her body and was about to scatter. She tried her best to open her eyes, fearing that she would never be able to open them again and fall into eternal darkness. She couldn't die. She desperately told herself in her heart. She still didn't know the Almighty's whereabouts. She didn't want to step on the road to hell with regrets. Although she tried to open her eyes, her vision was constantly turning black and everything was blurry. She could only see balls of light. She couldn't tell the color of the light as it jumped around in front of her eyes. It was like a dream. Who was it that saved her? The first person she thought of was the Almighty. The moment she fell into his arms, she even called out softly, "Almighty." Her voice was as soft as a mosquito, but it made the person hugging her slightly stiffen. At that moment, she knew that it wasn't him. It wasn't the Almighty. The Almighty wouldn't escape with her. If he really came back, he would use ruthless means to deal with Wu Mo. Then, who could it be? Who could save her from Wu Mo so easily? She couldn't see anything clearly and her nose couldn't even smell anything. All her senses seemed to have lost their functions quickly, making her unable to determine who saved her. However, no matter who saved her at this time, it was better than dying in Wu Mo's hands. Her heart was in pain and she couldn't help but move her body. "Momo, don't move." A voice suddenly sounded in her ears. Ning Xuemo's body suddenly stiffened and her eyes that were about to close opened again. Xue Yilan. It was actually Xue Yilan. Heavens, if she were to fall into his hands, she might as well die. Perhaps because he saw her suddenly widening eyes, Xue Yilan's arm slightly tightened. "Momo, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you in the slightest." His voice was magnetic and gentle as the first stream in March. How could Ning Xuemo believe him? She always felt that she couldn't do anything about being in his hands. She was so anxious that her vision turned black and she fainted. She had another dream. In the dream, she directly turned into a woman called Xue Yimo, and took advantage of the night to meet with a man from the devil realm. That man urged her to move faster, and even showed her a mirror. In the mirror, Xue Yilan was on the verge of death. His face was as pale as a ghost. The man told her that Xue Yilan only had half a month left to live. If she couldn't get that thing, Xue Yilan's soul would scatter. The man from the devil realm then left. Xue Yimo turned around and returned. She was preoccupied with her makeup in front of the mirror. Shinjoli appeared behind her and skillfully combed her hair. Seeing that she was absent-minded, he asked her what was on her mind. Xue Yimo turned around and threw herself into his arms. Like a child, she arched against his chest and asked him jokingly, "Julie, how much do you like me?" Shinjoli looked down at her and rubbed her head. "Every time you act like a spoiled child in front of me, you want something. Tell me, what do you want now?" Xue Yimo blinked her eyes and pointed at his chest. She said confidently, "I want your heart. Will you give it to me or not?" Chapter 1150. Shinjoli took advantage of the situation and pulled her into his arms, kissing her lips. "Isn't my heart already yours?" Xue Yimo hugged his neck and held his hand, kissing him again. "Let's make it clear, your heart is mine. You're not allowed to give it to anyone else." The two rubbed each other's ears for a while. Xue Yimo seemed to have thought of something and pursed her lips. "However, I heard that gods have 9 lives. In other words, you have 9 hearts. If you give me one, you'll have no place to put the other 8. Shinjoli bluntly knocked her forehead. "You're talking about cats. Cats have 9 lives. Little girl, don't use idioms." Xue Yimo chuckled. "So you're talking about cats. But if cats have 9 lives, then aren't you more powerful than cats, Julie? How many lives do you have?" Shinjoli picked her up and walked outside. "Gods don't age or die. How many lives do you think I have?" Xue Yimo's eyes moved slightly. She yawned lazily and hugged his neck like a lazy kitten. "Countless. It's good to be a god, to have countless lives to play with." The two chatted and laughed. She let him carry her away. After a moment, She looked around in puzzlement. Julie, where are you taking me? Shinjoli kept her in suspense. Guess. The pond full of green lotuses bloomed. Shinjoli led her to a lotus path. At the end of the lotus path, there were beautiful jellyfish swaying back and forth. The scenery here is so beautiful. She couldn't help but dance in circles on the lotus. Shinjoli held her hand and stepped on the jellyfish. There's something even more beautiful. Finally, Shueyimo saw a jellyfish-shaped dark blue dreamlike castle. She was stunned for a moment, as if she was looking at a childhood dream. This. Julie, so you also have such childish taste. Shinjoli's eyebrows twitched. He glanced at her. Didn't you say you didn't have a childhood? Didn't you say you didn't know what a childhood dream was like? Shueyimo was stunned for a moment. So you prepared this castle for me, do you like it? Shinjoli looked down at her condescendingly with an expression that said, try saying you don't like it. Shueyimo didn't say anything. Instead, she threw herself on his body and kissed him on the lips. Then, she buried her head in his chest and muttered something. Shinjoli obviously didn't hear him clearly. What did you say? Shueyimo once again hugged his neck. I like it. I like it so much. Shinjoli carried her in contentedly. It's good that you like it. Today is your birthday, so this is my birthday present to you. The scenery inside the blue castle was magnificent and full of childlike charm. Shueyimo looked here and there, and from time to time, she would turn in circles on the spot like a child. Shinjoli sat on the cloud bed and looked at her with a faint smile on his lips. Julie, let's live here from now on, okay? Shueyimo jumped in front of him and looked at him with sparkling eyes, as if she was afraid he wouldn't agree. The spiritual energy here is extraordinarily abundant. Let's cultivate here. Shinjoli pulled her onto the bed. The moment he kissed her deeply, he replied with a single word, okay. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Ning Shuemore felt like she was in a dream, yet not a dream. In the dream, she seemed to be Shueyimo and Shueyimo was her. She and Shinjoli spent a good time in that castle. The two of them lay side by side on the cloud bed and looked at the stars. They watched the clouds in the sky move and move. They sat together on the cloud bed and cultivated. Of course, they loved each other. Chapter 1151. Occasionally, when Shinjoli was in a good mood, he would fish for her, comb her hair, cook all kinds of delicious food for her, and even condense 2 kitchen knives to cut vegetables and meat. That was the life of a true husband and wife. That kind of time could only be described with one word, sweet and sweet. Scenes of happy life were like fast-forwarded movies, playing out one after another. Ning Shuemore was almost intoxicated in that kind of life. Of course, Ning Shuemore also felt that she was drifting away. For example, although she had transformed into Shueyimo, she could never understand her feelings. She always felt that Shueyimo seemed to have a lot of things on her mind, but she hid it very well, so it couldn't be seen from her appearance. Finally, one day, Shinjoli received a message from his disciple. The immortal world's emissary wanted to see him, saying that the devil ancestor had led a group of demons to wantonly invade the immortal world. They asked the supreme divinity to once again kill the devil ancestor and get rid of evil for the 3 realms. Can you not go? Shueyimo hugged his arm, obviously not wanting him to go. Shinjoli rubbed her hair. I owe the immortal world 2 favors, and I've already repaid them once. This is the last time. Obediently wait for me here. I'll be back in half a day. Then I'll go too. Shueyimo's attitude was firm. Shinjoli looked down at her, as if he wanted to see something in her eyes. Her eyes were clear, more transparent than crystals, and she insisted, I must go. Good. Shinjoli finally agreed. You tidy up, this king will wait for you outside. Shueyimo waited for Shinjoli to go out, then quickly began to tidy up the things in the castle. She even put away the 2 kitchen knives and put them in the side room. She paused in the room for a moment, then turned around and strode out. The wind and rain were gloomy, and dark clouds covered the sky. In the wilderness, the people of the immortal world and the devil world were fighting fiercely. The sound of the zither came from the red palanquin at the very back of the army. It was like the scythe of the Grim Reaper flashing by. The people of the celestial realm used all kinds of magic weapons to resist, but they were still forced to retreat. Some of the weaker ones had their magic weapons shattered by the sound of the zither and turned into ashes. When Shueimo arrived with Shinjoli, she saw this scene. Shinjoli sat upright in the air. With a wave of his hand, a zither appeared on his lap. After a few clangs, he began to fight with the demonic sound. Shueimo was also sitting next to Shinjoli. She looked down at everything below and the blood-red palanquin in the distance. She pursed her lips and didn't say a word. Of course, she didn't do anything. This time, the demonic sound was extremely powerful, several levels higher than the one played by Shueimo. He was actually able to match Shinjoli for the time being. The two kinds of zither sounds went back and forth, colliding in the wilderness. Even the originally calm air was shattered by the sound of the zither, and the dark clouds in the sky crazily rotated. Shueimo seemed to be shaken by the two kinds of zither sounds. Her face was slightly pale, and she leaned against Shinjoli on the cloud. Shinjoli glanced at her while playing the zither, then slightly frowned. He flicked his finger in the air and set up a barrier around Shueimo. He actually protected Shueimo inside, but because of this slight distraction, the demonic sound took advantage of it. His body was slightly shaken, and he was injured. A line of blood seeped out of his arm. "Julie, you're injured." Shueimo's face was pale, and she was about to grab his arm. "Don't move, be good." Shinjoli flicked his sleeve, and the wound on his arm automatically began to heal. Chapter 1152. Of course, Shueimo's fingers didn't touch his arm. Because Shinjoli had set up a barrier around her body, the opposite demonic sound couldn't hurt her. Naturally, she couldn't touch Shinjoli, who was close to her. The two Guqin sounds continued to fight in the air. Not knowing why, Ning-Shuemo was somewhat panicked. Her heart was raised high, as if something that could reverse fate was about to happen, but she was powerless to stop it. Anxious, her vision turned black. When she opened her eyes again, she found that she had become an independent entity again. When she looked around, she found that she had become a spectator. She saw that Shinjoli was playing the Guqin and fighting against the person in the blood-red palanquin. At the same time, he urged the cloud below him to slowly approach the blood-red palanquin. Obviously, he wanted to pull out the person in the palanquin and then completely eliminate him. And the soldiers of the immortal and demon world were once again fighting. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and broken limbs were scattered everywhere. Accompanied by the screams of injuries or near death, it was exceptionally frightening. The battle between the two Guqin sounds was exceptionally long. Shinjoli's mental power was not light, and beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead. Shueimo's face was pale as she sat beside Shinjoli. She didn't say a word and was very quiet. As if she knew that the supreme god couldn't be disturbed at this time, Ning-Shuemo's gaze fell on the blood-red palanquin. She inexplicably knew that the person playing the Guqin in the palanquin this time was the elusive demon ancestor. Her gaze once again fell on Shinjoli's face, looking at his white jade-like handsome face, lost in thought. In a trance, she felt that Shinjoli's martial arts seemed to have regressed a bit. His Guqin sounds weren't as pure as when she first saw him. Originally, his Guqin sounds were majestic enough to penetrate the clouds and split the stone, without any filth, without any desire, without a trace of flaw. In this world, there was simply no opponent who could match him. But now, there was a trace of noise in his Guqin sounds, as if he was worried, obsessed, and unable to let go. More importantly, his mental power seemed to have regressed, and the power of his Guqin sounds was much weaker than before. Ning-Shuemo's gaze fell on Shueimo's body. His heart suddenly stirred. Shueimo was a devil with a demonic body. Normally, a demonic body couldn't fuse with a human. Once fused, it would inevitably harm the human's life. Shinjoli was a god. Naturally, he wouldn't lose his life just because he mated with Shueimo. However, would he lose a lot of his power because of this? Ning-Shuemo's heart raced. She knew that something big was about to happen. Although Shinjoli had lost some of his power, he still had the upper hand in the battle between the two Guqin sounds. The magnificent Guqin sound suppressed the demonic sound to the point that it was almost unable to turn around. The cloud under his feet was also slowly approaching the big red palanquin. In the midst of the fierce battle, Shui Yimo, who was on the cloud, suddenly screamed. Her body was entangled by a soft rope that flew out from the big red palanquin. She was pulled down from the cloud and fell towards the blood-red palanquin. Shinjoli's complexion changed slightly. His figure moved, and he followed suit. Demonic sound took the opportunity to clang several times. Countless sound waves shot towards Shinjoli's body, seemingly wanting to stop him from chasing after her. The faint blue light waves hit his protective barrier like water waves. His complexion also turned pale. However, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, he chased after her even faster, even more urgently. Finally, just as Shui Yimo's body was about to be pulled into the blood-red palanquin, Shinjoli caught up with her. He held her in his arms. Just as he waved his sleeve to cut off the soft rope binding her body, his body suddenly stiffened. Chapter 1153. A short blade pierced his heart. There were 2 grooves on the blade, and a line of blood quickly flowed down the grooves, flowing into Shui Yimo's sleeve. Ning Shuamo's heart instantly fell into icy water. Shui Yimo actually killed the great god. You! Shinjoli's deep blue eyes were like a stormy sea, falling on the face of the girl in his embrace. It seemed as if he didn't believe it, but also seemed as if he was disappointed. He was still holding her, his hands clenched into fists behind her back. A faint white light flickered, as if he wanted to do something, but couldn't. Shui Yimo's face was snow-white. It was unknown whether it was because of the injury or because of fear. Looking at him in his embrace, she said in a flat voice, "I said, I want your heart. You also promised me. I only want your heart's blood. Then you were all fake to me." Shinjoli's face was even paler. Shui Yimo lowered her eyes, her eyelashes slightly trembling, but her voice was cold. "Yes, it was all fake. Forget about me." With a flip of her hand, she put away the jade bottle that was used to collect the blood. Then, she abruptly slapped his chest, sending his body flying. "Don't." Ning Shuamo, who had been patiently watching from the sidelines, suddenly shouted. She felt so distressed that she wanted to flip over, and suddenly threw herself over. Everything suddenly disappeared. The blood-red palanquin, the bleeding great god, and Shui Yimo, who had suddenly turned hostile, disappeared like melting snow. Not even a shadow was left in her mind, leaving behind only heartache. Her heart really hurt. It hurt as if there was a knife still stuck there, never being pulled out. Ning Shuamo trembled as she opened her eyes. The scene in front of her was somewhat blurry. She faintly saw a red-clothed, black-haired man swaying in front of her. All the memories before she fainted came back, and Ning Shuamo's body instantly stiffened. If she didn't remember incorrectly, she had fallen into Shui Yilan's hands again. The man swaying in front of her now should be him. What is he doing? You! Why are you shaking? Ning Shuamo managed to spit out a few words. Probably because of her injury, her voice was extremely hoarse. "Momo, you're awake." A hand touched her forehead. "You still have a fever." Ning Shuamo shook her head and tried to push his hand away, but her strength was too weak. Clearly, it was not effective. Instead, it seemed like her head was rubbing against his palm. Shui Yilan's gaze deepened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Momo, don't move. Your wound will open up again." Wounds? Ning Shuamo finally remembered the sword that Wu Mo stabbed her. Her heart shrank, her vision turned black, and she fainted again. This time, she didn't have any dreams. Even when she was unconscious, she still felt the pain in her heart. That pain drilled in and out, making her feel uneasy even though she was unconscious. She woke up a few times in the middle, but she was still groggy. Most of the time, she was in a daze and fell asleep again after opening her eyes. Every time she woke up, she would see Shui Yilan's figure by her side. He would wipe the cold sweat on her forehead, heal her, and talk to her. His voice was intermittent in her drowsy ears, making her feel somewhat annoyed. When she woke up again, she couldn't help but shout, "Shut up." This shout probably affected the sword wound on her body. Her heart suddenly hurt. and she fainted again. Maybe her shout worked, or maybe she fainted too thoroughly. After that, she didn't hear him speak again. She felt that her ears were much quieter. Chapter 1154. When she was slightly awake, a question would appear in her mind. Why did Wu Mo want to kill her? Was he not afraid of the great god's punishment? In Ning Xuemor's mind, she recalled the red-clothed little girl she saw when she was half awake. That girl was like a beautiful little devil. Her smile was sweet and pure, but it awakened the greatest fear in the depths of her heart. She was a jinx. Who would be the next person to die because of her? Who would it be? Could it be that the great god was really killed by her? No way. Definitely not. The great god said that his life was tough and he was not afraid of her jinx. Moreover, the great god was already an immortal, he would not die, he must have met with some accident and was trapped, unable to come back for a while. That was why Wu Mo wanted to get rid of her, to kill the great god first and report later. That must be it. That must be it. She hated that she was too anxious at that time, so she did not notice and rushed over, giving him a chance to stab her. Damn it. She actually fell for this kind of child's play. However, what accident did the great god meet with? So much so that his moonlight sword fell into Wu Mo's hands, and Wu Mo did not care about his punishment and wanted to kill her. When she thought of this, Ning Xuemor felt as if there was a fire burning in her heart. This fire made the sword wound on her heart even harder to heal. The wound was sometimes good and sometimes bad, and she was sometimes awake and sometimes unconscious. Time passed quietly while she was awake and asleep. She did not know how much time had passed, but she finally woke up again. Ning Xuemor slowly opened her eyes. This time, her vision was no longer hazy. She could see everything around her clearly. She was in a complicated and gorgeous hall. Below her was a cloud silk mattress, and above her was a mermaid silk quilt. The bed curtains were double-sided embroidered, thin and transparent. Embroidered on the side of the bed curtains was a small furry fox, lying lazily in the shade with its 9 tails swaying behind it. The green trees and red fox gave people a strong visual impact. Ning Xuemor felt that this arrangement was somewhat familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen it before. She touched her chest with her fingers. There was a thick bandage there. She moved slightly and it affected the wound. The piercing pain made her break out in cold sweat. Where is this place? Shuilan's nest. Ning Xuemor tried to sit up, but the moment she moved, her wound hurt terribly. She was sweating profusely, but she didn't even have the strength to sit up. The door creaked open, and Shuilan slowly walked in, wearing a fiery red robe. Ning Xuemor was shocked. She closed her eyes and pretended to be unconscious. She could sense that Shuilan had walked up to her bed, but he didn't move for a long time. Ning Xuemor tried her best to control her heartbeat. She could sense Shuilan's presence. He was standing just 1 step away from her bed and had not left. What was he going to do? Ning Xuemor had goosebumps all over her body. However, she forced herself not to move. This person's actions were too unpredictable. Ning Xuemor had never been able to understand his personality, so it was hard for her to guess his goal. She couldn't get up right now, so she didn't have the strength to resist him. She could only pretend to be unconscious, hoping that she could fool him and quickly leave. Was this bastard going to turn into a fossil in front of her bed? Ning Xuemor couldn't help but curse in her heart, but she still closed her eyes. She was very good at pretending to be unconscious. If one wasn't a professional, they wouldn't be able to tell if she was awake or unconscious. Shuilan suddenly sat down beside her, but he didn't move for a long time. Chapter 1155. Sitting next to her was a person with an extraordinarily strong presence. The pressure on Ning Xuemor's heart was also extraordinarily large. A moment later, she felt a warmth under the blanket. There was another leg. This bastard crawled under her blanket. Ning Xuemor's hair almost stood on end. She could no longer pretend to faint. Abruptly opening her eyes, she saw Shuilan's back leaning against the other side of the bed. One of his legs was inside her quilt, and the other was below. He crossed his arms, and his eyes seemed to be filled with mountains and rivers, filled with tenderness. "You're awake." Ning Xuemore pursed her lips and didn't reply to his nonsense. She secretly took a deep breath, but this slight movement affected her wound, causing her to sweat again. "Take your leg back." She didn't want to sleep on the same bed as him. She couldn't sleep on the same bed. Shui Yilan's eyes darkened and he didn't move. "Momo, I'm tired. I'll rest here for a while." Ning Xuemore didn't say anything and struggled to get up. Of course, such a violent movement affected her wound, causing her face to turn pale. Shui Yilan's expression changed slightly. He sat up straight and pressed a hand on her shoulder to stop her. "Are you crazy? If you continue like this, your wound will tear open again. You get off." Ning Xuemore insisted. "Otherwise, I'll get off." Shui Yilan, he laughed bitterly and got off the bed. "Momo, I've never been as ruthless as you." "Fine, I'll get off. You stay here." Ning Xuemore closed her eyes. Her struggle had indeed torn open her wound a little, causing her to be in pain. She was waiting for the pain to pass. There was a moment of silence in the room. Shui Yilan had also changed his previous aggressive teasing. He sat on a stool beside the bed and looked at the fine beads of sweat rolling down her forehead with a complicated gaze. It was like pity, anger, and sorrow. After a while, the pain finally passed. Ning Xuemore opened her eyes again. "How long have I been unconscious?" "5 days, Shui Yilan replied. Ning Xuemore tilted her head and looked out of the window. Her vision was a little red, and the afterglow of the setting sun painted the window paper a little reddish yellow. 5 days had already passed. She didn't die. Instead, she spent 5 days at the gates of hell. Is the Almighty back yet? Did he know that Wu Mo almost stabbed her to death? She shouldn't be back yet, right? Otherwise, he would have turned the world upside down to look for him. Where is this? Ning Xuemore's gaze wandered around the room. She had a feeling that the layout of the room was very familiar. "What do you think?" Shui Yilan asked. How did she know? But since he asked, could it be that she should know about this place? Ning Xuemore searched in her mind for a long time. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat. In a dream, this place seemed to be a scene in a dream. Although she could remember some of her dreams recently, she couldn't remember them clearly. She always felt that there was a thick layer of fog in her mind. Occasionally, she could remember 1 or 2 fragments, but the fragments were also vague. Usually, she didn't take those dreams to heart. Now that she saw the layout of the room, she remembered a little bit of it. "Momo, this is the place where you used to live." Shui Yilan stood up and lifted the bed curtain so that she could see everything in the room clearly. "The table and chairs here are arranged according to the way you used to live here. What do you think? Do you like it?" Chapter 1156. Ning Xuemore. The decorations here were extremely extravagant, with crystal candlesticks and jade tabletop. Everything was shining brightly. This place was even more magnificent than the royal palaces she had seen before. It was like an exquisitely crafted cloison, with every line and hook exuding an extravagant aura. Was this her taste in the past? Who was he kidding? Ning Xuemore retracted her gaze and replied calmly, "Shui Yilan, I'm not your Momo, and this is not where I used to live. I don't like such decorations either, so stop wasting your time." Shui Yilan narrowed his eyes. "You don't like it?" "I don't like it." Shui Yilan did not say anything else, but his eyes were fixed on her face, as though he was trying to read something from it. Ning Xuemore did not want to say anything else either. She closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing. Her heart had been pierced, and if not for her MF reaching level 7 and Shui Yilan's treatment, she would have been a dead person by now. A bowl of steaming hot medicine was brought to her lips, and Shui Yilan's voice drifted over. "Drink the medicine." The medicine had a strange smell, and Ning Xuemore knew that it was extremely bitter even without tasting it. She sniffed it slightly and could tell that it was indeed used to treat her wound. However, one of the herbs was not right. If it was changed to another type of herb, her wound would probably be better. She wanted to reach out to take it, but the moment she raised her hand, the pain from her wound was excruciating, causing her to break out in cold sweat. Shwe Elan reached out and carried her up. He was extremely careful, not affecting her wound at all. His control of strength was frighteningly precise. Momo, don't move. I'll feed you. She leaned weakly in his arms. Shwe Elan was afraid that her struggling would affect her wound, so he sealed her acupoints so that she could only move her head. The rest was completely at his mercy. Ning Shuemor, Shwe Elan, I'm not your Momo. Ning Shuemor was a little annoyed. Shwe Elan was deeply in love with her, but he obviously treated her as another woman. This made her angry, amused, and helpless. Shwe Elan smiled elegantly. All right, if you say so, then so be it. Come, drink the medicine. He fed her spoonful by spoonful. Ning Shuemor, she decided not to argue and slowly swallowed the medicine one mouthful at a time. That medicine was indeed extremely bitter. Just one sip was enough to make people want to pull their tongue out and soak it in the water to get rid of the bitter taste. However, Ning Shuemor did not care. Since she had survived, it proved that the heavens had not truly destroyed her. She had to quickly recover and find a way to leave this place to find the Almighty. There was no unbearable sin in this world, only a heart that could not be overcome. She had to get better. Hurry up and get better. She gulped down the medicine in big mouthfuls. Her brows were tightly knitted together, but she had no intention of stopping. The bowl of medicine was quickly fed to her. Shwe Elan pulled out a piece of candied fruit out of nowhere. Come, eat this to get rid of the bitter taste. He was about to stuff it into her mouth. Ning Shuemor pursed her lips and shook her head slightly. Shwe Elan was puzzled. You've already drunk the medicine. Are you still afraid that I'll put poison in the candied fruit? This candied fruit clashes with one of the other medicines. If I eat it, the effects of the medicine will be reduced. Ning Shuemor said softly. Shwe Elan slowly retracted the candied fruit in his hand and smiled. Seems like your desire to live is abnormally strong. I forgot that you're a famous doctor. Chapter 1157. Although he was smiling, there was a trace of desolation in his voice. Ning Shuemor didn't know what was going on, but she felt that Shwe Elan's attitude was strange after this meeting. It made her unable to feel his pulse and didn't know what he was up to. However, this time, her life was saved by him. That was undeniable. Ning Shuemor was also someone who could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. She decided that as long as Shwe Elan didn't scheme against her and didn't touch her again, she would be more polite to him. Shwe Elan placed her back on the bed. His movements were still gentle and appropriate, and his tone was so gentle that it could drip water. Lie down properly. I'll go pick some more medicine for you. Was this still the vicious and merciless Shwe Elan who would desperately torture her whenever he was unhappy? Could it be that someone was impersonating him? Ning Shuemor's gaze swept over his face and she blurted out, Are you really Shwe Elan? Did you take the wrong medicine? Bang! Shwe Elan's hand loosened. Ning Shuemor's body, which had been placed halfway by him, fell directly onto the pillow and affected her wound. She let out a low cry as cold sweat poured down her body. Her vision blurred and she almost fainted. After the heart-wrenching pain passed, Ning Shuemor opened her eyes again. She saw Shwe Elan sitting beside her and looking at her with a smile. Are you sure it's me now? Ning Shuemor, all right, this is more like the evil Shwe Elan. Ning Shuemor gritted her teeth and glared at him. She was in no mood to pay attention to him. Shwe Elan raised his hand and gently wiped the sweat on her forehead with his sleeve. Momo, I will never change. The one who will change is you. Don't worry, I'll make you completely come back. Ning Shuemor's hair stood on end when she heard his last sentence. Return completely? Not to mention that she, Ning Shuemor, was not that Momo. Even if that Momo was her previous life, that was only her previous life. The previous life and this life could not be mixed together. In this life, she was only Ning Shuemor. She would not become anyone else. How did he want her to come back? What strange method was he going to use this time? Ning Shuemor shuddered at the thought of the people he had killed and controlled. She took a deep breath and changed the topic. My injury, was it you who treated me? The place where she was stabbed was very sensitive. If he were to treat and bandage her wound, he would definitely see her chest. Based on how Shwer Elan had treated her in the past, he might really do it himself. Shwer Elan's eyes rippled as if he had already guessed what she was worried about. Do you want me to treat you? Ning Shuamore looked at him without saying anything. Shwer Elan reached out and touched her face. You don't have to worry. Ning Shuamore was just about to heave a sigh of relief when he added, anyway, I've already seen your body. It doesn't matter if I see it one more time, right? It's your big head ghost. If Ning Shuamore was free right now, she would definitely hit him with a pillow. Shwer Elan smiled and touched her face again. Be good and recover. I'll go out for a while. In order to prevent Ning Shuamore from playing any new tricks, he did not release her acupoints. He gently tucked her in before turning to leave. This bastard. He never forgot to take advantage of her. Ning Shuamore had the urge to send him flying with a kick. But now that she was in Shwer Elan's hands and was seriously injured, there was nothing she could do. Chapter 1158. Ning Shuamore closed her eyes and adjusted her breath. She used the method that the Almighty taught her to heal herself. She had just completed one cycle of psychokinesis when she opened her eyes. She realized that there was a girl with bright eyes and white teeth in the room. The girl was holding a plate with gauze and ointment on it. She walked to Ning Shuamore's bed and smiled gently. Miss Ning, I'm here to help you change your bandages. She was obviously the 8th princess of the Bright King's mansion, Ming Wan. Ning Shuamore was good at recognizing people. She immediately recognized her. Why was she here? Why was she in Shwer Elan's territory? Ning Shuamore's heart was filled with questions, but she did not ask. Ming Wan gently removed Ning Shuamore's blanket and unbuttoned her clothes. Ning Shuamore's acupoints were sealed. She could not move and let Ming Wan do whatever she wanted. Regardless of whether it was removing gauze or changing bandages, Ming Wan was extremely skilled. Ning Shuamore did not expect that this princess, who was ostentatious wherever she went, would have such good medical skills. Ning Shuamore's heart skipped a beat. These few days, were you the one who bandaged my wounds? Princess Ming Wan swiftly applied the ointment for Ning Shuamore while answering her question. Yes, how do you feel? Does the wound hurt less? Ning Shuamore heaved a sigh of relief. It turned out that Shwer Elan had instructed Ming Wan to treat her wounds. He did not do it himself. She did not expect that Shwer Elan would suddenly become a gentleman. Ning Shuamore was finally relieved. She looked at Princess Ming Wan busy and chatted with her. This imperial Princess Ming Wan was a straightforward person. She did not hide her thoughts and spoke whatever was on her mind. Her voice was crisp and clear, like pearls falling on a jade plate. From her, Ning Shuamore found out some things that happened when she was in a coma. It turned out that after Shwer Elan had rescued her, he had captured more than 100 famous doctors to treat her injuries, causing chaos in the medical centers in the nearby cities. Most people wouldn't be able to do anything about a wound that pierced the heart, not to mention that Shwer Elan didn't allow anyone to touch Ning Shuamore's body. He even stared coldly at them for a long time just to feel her pulse. This caused those godly doctors to be even more at a loss as to where to start. All of them were at a loss as to what to do. All they could do was panic. Some doctors even tried to persuade Shwer Elan to give up, telling him to prepare a coffin for the injured lady as soon as possible. In the end, those godly doctors were all sent to the Yellow Springs by Shwer Elan. They didn't even have a coffin. His cruel methods caused the other godly doctors to keep quiet out of fear. They didn't dare to say any more nonsense, but they didn't have any better ideas. Under Shwer Elan's coercion, they wrote many prescriptions, but none of them were practical. 2 days before she was injured, Ning Shuamore was in a critical condition and almost died. Fortunately, on the 3rd day, Shwer Elan found this Princess Ming Wan in front of him. Although this girl was young, her medical talent was extremely high. She was especially good at treating sword wounds. As long as the person was still breathing, she could bring them back to life easily. Originally, Shwer Elan didn't know of Princess Ming Wan's reputation. However, He happened to overhear two of Princess Ming Wan's subordinates bragging about their princess's medical skills in a restaurant. They said that their princess's medical skills were rare, and Shui Ilan happened to overhear it. Shui Ilan was frantically searching for godly doctors. When he heard this news, how could he be courteous? He barged into Princess Ming Wan's room in the middle of the night and carried her in her sleep. Chapter 1159. Royal Princess Ming Wan's martial arts were not bad, and her bodyguards were also top-notch. However, they had met Shui Ilan, this mysterious person whose martial arts were second only to Di Zun. There was no one that Shui Ilan could not snatch away. Thus, Royal Princess Ming Wan, who had been sleeping soundly in her room, was carried here when she woke up. She was only wearing a nightgown. Although Royal Princess Ming Wan's temper was not small, she was smart enough not to get angry at this time. She calmly asked Shui Ilan what he wanted to do. Shui Ilan naturally would not beat around the bush with her. He immediately forced her to save him. Royal Princess Ming Wan first looked at Ning Xuemo's injuries, then looked at Shui Ilan's nervousness. She smiled in surprise, then slowly began to state her conditions. After Shui Ilan heard her say there's hope, his attitude immediately took a huge turn for the better, and he agreed to almost all of her requests. Thus, Royal Princess Ming Wan not only had her own room here, but she also ordered Shui Ilan to barge into Ming Wang Palace again just to take back a few sets of clothes that she often wore. The moonlight sword in Ning Xuemo's chest was pulled out by Royal Princess Ming Wan. All of the subsequent treatments were her efforts. She had successfully pulled Ning Xuemo back from the gates of hell. Royal Princess Ming Wan told Ning Xuemo the gist of what had happened. Ning Xuemo pursed her lips. She did not know what to feel in her heart. It seemed that Shui Ilan was really doing it for her good this time, and was not teasing her like before. Moreover, after meeting again, he kept calling her Momo, Momo. It was obvious that he was treating her as another person to dote on. It seemed that Shui Ilan had recovered his memories from before he was sealed. He probably treated her as the woman in his memories. Momo, Momo, it sounded so familiar. Ning Xuemo didn't remember her dreams. She only faintly felt that the name Momo seemed to appear more frequently by her side recently. Then, what about this sword? Ning Xuemo asked. In the hands of the owner of this place, Princess Ming Wan said. Who was it that was so cruel and merciless to stab you? If it wasn't for the fact that your psychokinesis was high and you were able to use it to protect your heart meridian in time, this sword strike would have taken your life. Ning Xuemo lowered her eyes. That moonlight sword was custom-made for the great god in the everlasting nation. Originally, she wanted to make a flute, but she didn't expect that a moonlight flute would appear. Thus, she simply let the blacksmith forge the moonlight stone into a sword. 3 months ago, she and the great god had taken it back from the immortal kingdom. She still remembered the scene when she gave the sword to him. His expression didn't change much, but he still wore the sword on his body. One had to know that the great god had that storage space on him. All of his things were in that space. He never wore those miscellaneous items on his body. This sword became the only accessory he had on him. She still remembered when the great god appeared in front of the Sun-Moon sect's disciples with that sword, the gazes of those disciples. They were so shocked that they couldn't describe it. Even the usually calm Yelu Jing'an widened her eyes and looked at her master as if she was looking at a western scenery. Shinjioli, who had always been low-key and mysterious, purposely walked around Buddha Lotus Mountain twice so that all of the Sun-Moon sect's disciples on the mountain could see what his sword looked like. It was clearly something that had happened not long ago, but now it felt like a lifetime ago when she thought about it. How was the great god now? Ning Xuemo couldn't wait to heal her injuries so that she could go and find him. Chapter 1160. Ning Xuemo tried to use her telepathy to contact Kirin, but she could not reach him at all. Shui Ilan must have set up some kind of enchantment here to prevent her from contacting Kirin. She told herself that she had to stay calm. She could not panic at such a time. Ning Xuemo and Princess Ming Wan chatted for a bit and discussed some medical theories. Ning Xuemore's profound medical knowledge made Princess Ming Wan prostrate herself in admiration. She had met Princess Ming Wan once before, but she was dressed as an old lady at that time. Although they had been together for a few days, the princess did not suspect anything. After discussing for a while, Ning Xuemore added a few ingredients to Princess Ming Wan's prescription and asked her to give it to Shui Yilan to make the medicine. Princess Ming Wan sighed. Palace Master Shui has probably gone to pick the herbs himself. We can just wait for him to come back and make the medicine. Princess Ming Wan, can't you go there personally? Ning Xuemore was puzzled. There is nothing special in my new prescription. You can buy it from a normal pharmacy. Princess Ming Wan shook her head. We are all locked up here. We can't get out at all. Let's wait for Palace Master Shui to come back first. She smiled and walked out. When she reached the door, she paused for a moment and turned back to say, Miss Ning, this Palace Master Shui treats you really well. These few days, almost all of the herbs were personally picked by him. Every single one of them is an extremely valuable treasure. Ning Xuemore raised her head and saw that Princess Ming Wan had already walked out. Ning Xuemore closed her eyes. No matter how well Shui Yilan treated her, she did not have any feelings for him. They were not even friends. Moreover, Shui Yilan treated her well because he was transferring his feelings. He treated her as another woman. Her injuries were too serious. Her chest hurt when she breathed a little too loudly. She endured the pain and slowly adjusted her breathing. The sooner she could recover, the better. When it was dark, Shui Yilan finally came back. When he returned, he went straight to the medicine refining room and placed the newly picked herbs in front of Princess Ming Wan. You can boil them again. Commandery Princess Ming Wan looked at the travel-worn him and then looked at the herbs. She wanted to say something but hesitated. What? Is there something wrong with this herb? Shui Yilan was extremely sensitive and immediately asked. Imperial Princess Ming Wan took a deep breath and said, Lady Ning wrote a prescription herself. The effect should be better than the one I wrote. I don't need these herbs. Shui Yilan was speechless. He had fought with the guardian beasts for half a day to collect these herbs and had even suffered some minor injuries. Who would have thought that he wouldn't be able to use them anymore? Chapter 1161. Imperial Princess Ming Wan directly handed the prescription that Ning Xuemore had written for herself to Shui Yilan. These herbs can be bought at the pharmacy, so there is no need to pick new ones. I just don't know how effective they are. Shui Yilan took the prescription without hesitation. She is a godly doctor, and she wrote this prescription for herself. Of course, it can't be wrong. He turned around and disappeared. Naturally, he went to get the herbs. Imperial Princess Ming Wan slowly sat down and looked at Shui Yilan's disappearing figure, slightly lost in thought. In her life, she had seen at least 800, if not 1,000, beautiful men, but none of them were as beautiful as Shui Yilan. Furthermore, he had a certain aura about him. He was as elegant as a poem, as beautiful as a painting, and when he moved, he was like a graceful scholar. But when he was ruthless, he could kill people without blinking. He could even kill people while talking and laughing. It made people feel a chill down to their bones. Ruthless like a snake, elegant like a crane. These two contradictory auras were perfectly combined on him. It did not give people a sense of disharmony, as if he was born this way. This man was like a shining object. Imperial Princess Ming Wan was unconsciously attracted to him. When she was kidnapped, there was still a fire in her heart. She also hated him and was afraid of him. But after interacting with him for a few days, she could not help but look at him. At this moment, she was attracted by his deep feelings. So this kind of man could also care so much about a woman and take care of her. He must have fallen in love with this girl called Ning Xuemore, right? It was a pity that the person that Ning Xuemore liked was not him. The falling flowers were in love, but the heartless flowing water was heartless. She could only sigh helplessly. She shook her head and stopped herself from thinking too much. She focused on refining the medicine. After Ning Xuemore used the medicine that she had prescribed, her injuries healed quickly. 10 days later, she was able to get out of bed and walk freely. In these 10 days, Shwe Ilan would come to see her every day and talk to her. He had changed from his frivolous attitude towards her in the past to a refined and modest gentleman. After all, Ning Xuemore already had a preconceived impression of him. No matter how elegant or gentlemanly he acted in front of her, she always felt that he was holding back a bellyful of evil tricks. She didn't know how he was secretly plotting against her. Now that she couldn't escape from his grasp, she might as well not think about running away for the time being. When Shwe Ilan chatted with her, she pretended to be mute most of the time and didn't respond to him for a long time. Otherwise, she would pretend to be asleep and ignore him. She could clearly sense Shwe Ilan's disappointment, but she could only pretend that she did not see it. Since he couldn't give the other party what he wanted, then he shouldn't give him the slightest bit of hope. Although this seemed cruel, it was actually a kind of mercy. Shwe Ilan's nature wasn't particularly good-tempered. There were a few times when he wanted to flare up, but when he saw Ning Xuemore's pale face, he held himself back. Now, she was as weak as a fine porcelain. She couldn't withstand too much stimulation. If he overdid it, her injuries might worsen again. He could only endure it. Another 5 days passed. Ning Xuemore had already begun to stroll outside the house. After she came out, she discovered that this place was a palace. It was built in the middle of a valley and surrounded by majestic green mountains. She couldn't tell which mountain it was located on. There was obviously a barrier here. Ning Xuemore, accompanied by Princess Ming Wan, left the palace and walked down the mountain. Not long after, they were stopped by an invisible barrier. Princess Ming Wan told her that there were such barriers all around. Without Earth rank level 8 psychokinesis, it was impossible to break through. Chapter 1162. Ning Xuemore looked at Princess Ming Wan and asked, "Have you already escaped?" Princess Ming Wan paused and couldn't help but laugh. Indeed, nothing can be hidden from Miss Ning. On the second day of her arrival, she had already thought of a way to escape. However, she couldn't even find a crack that could lead to the outside. Ning Xuemore had studied the structure of this continent and naturally, she had also studied all kinds of famous people. She knew that Princess Ming Wan was also a genius. She used to be a maid in front of the ancestor and now had the psychokinesis of an Earth rank level 4. She was the actual ruler of the Bright King residence and was first class in terms of scheming and intelligence. If she was not on the same side as Shwe Ilan, then her words could be trusted. Although Ning Xuemore was an expert in breaking barriers, her power had not recovered yet. She had not even recovered 10% of her power, so naturally, she could not break through this place. Everything would have to wait until her power recovered. She turned around and walked back slowly. When she reached the palace she lived in, she paused. Shwe Ilan was standing there in a red robe, leaning against the palace door. His lake-like eyes fell on her, but she didn't know what he was thinking. Ning Xuemore wanted to walk around him and enter the palace, but he grabbed her wrist. "How is your recovery?" "It's okay." Ning Xuemore wanted to pull her wrist back, but he was strong and she had not recovered her strength. She couldn't pull her wrist back and her face darkened. "Let go. Momo, walk with me." Shwe Ilan did not let go of her. Instead, he pulled her and walked outside. His hand was holding her wrist so tightly that it hurt. Ning Xuemore tried to pull her wrist back. "I'm tired. I don't want to walk anymore." "Let go." Shwe Ilan used a little strength and pulled her to his side. He looked into her eyes and smiled faintly. "Tired? Then I'll carry you." Ning Xuemore. She knew he would do it. "Shwe Ilan, do you always like to force others?" Shwe Ilan held her hand and walked forward. "I usually don't force people, because if they show any signs of being forced, I'll kill them directly. The only person I want to force is you. You should feel honored." This was really twisting words and forcing logic. Robber theory. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but sneer. "Are you also so reluctant with your Momo?" Shwe Ilan abruptly stopped in his tracks. Ning Xuemore was caught off guard and almost fell over. She staggered for a moment before she quickly steadied herself. The wound on her chest felt like it had been pierced by an awl. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Shwe Elan pulled her close to his side and lifted his sleeve to gently wipe away her sweat. Momo, when you regain your memories of your past life, you'll know how I treat you. Ning Xuemo, she didn't want to argue with Shwe Elan about whether she was Momo or not. She had already declared countless times in the past few days, but Shwe Elan didn't listen at all. Her face turned cold. What if I can't recover? Damn it. Even if that Momo was her past life, she didn't want to recover. She was Ning Xuemo, not just any other woman. Shwe Elan raised his hand to smooth her messy hair and said with certainty, Momo, you'll recover. At this moment, he was leading her to a hillside. There were flowers swaying on the hillside. The flowers were simple and elegant, but they didn't seem to match the extravagant buildings here. Chapter 1163. There was a wooden bench at the top of the hill. It had an antique feel to it and had a rustic feel to it. Shwe Elan pulled her to sit on the bench. Momo, don't you think the scenery here is a bit familiar? Ning Xuemo swept her eyes over her surroundings before bluntly shaking her head. Nothing. We used to come here often. You also liked the scenery here. Shwe Elan was unwilling to give up. It was the past again. It was about him and Momo again. Ning Xuemo was too lazy to reply. She simply sat on the bench and closed her eyes to rest. Her hair was suddenly brushed aside from behind. She opened her eyes in surprise and subconsciously wanted to turn around. Shwe Elan held her back. Momo, what kind of hairstyle do you like? He asked while combing her long hair. Ning Xuemo was speechless. She suddenly felt a bit irritated and wanted to stand up. However, Shwe Elan simply sealed her acupoints so that she could sit steadily in front of him. His fingers were nimble and in a short moment, he combed her hair into a beautiful hairstyle. After he finished combing her hair, he took out a bronze mirror and showed it to her. Here, Momo. This is your favorite hairstyle. Are you satisfied with it? A young girl was reflected in the bronze mirror. Her face was pale, but her facial features were delicate. Her black hair covered her forehead, and her black hair draped over her shoulders. There was a garland on top of her head. It was made from those elegant little flowers, and it made her face look a little brighter. To be honest, this hairstyle was not ugly. Ning Xuemo might have liked this hairstyle on a normal day. However, Shwe Elan was obviously dressing her up as another woman. This made her feel very uncomfortable. She had the urge to tear this hairstyle apart. She closed her eyes and did not want to say anything. Shwe Elan looked at her for a moment and did not force her. He unsealed her acupoints and pulled her up. Let's walk around somewhere else. Since she couldn't resist, Ning Xuemo simply let him lead her away. Shwe Elan held her hand as they walked through one place after another. Every place had its own uniqueness. Ning Xuemo keenly felt that the scenery of this place seemed to be a composite version of several places. Just like a certain film studio, many scenes were pieced together and all of them were cloned. Every time they arrived at a place, Shwe Elan would inevitably ask her if she had any impression of the place. Ning Xuemo was also very calm and said that she had no impression of the place. After walking for 4 to 6 hours, Ning Xuemo's body was still too weak. After walking for so long, cold sweat started to form on her forehead. She looked at Shwe Elan. How much longer do you plan to walk? Shwe Elan looked at her face and his eyes darkened. Go back and rest. Nightfall. There were a few stars in the sky. Princess Ming Wn finished changing Ning Xuemo's medicine and came out. When she raised her head, she saw Shwe Elan sitting alone on the roof of the hall in front of her, drinking wine. His posture was tall and straight, but there was a dejected and lonely aura. There were a few wine jars piled up beside him. He was holding one in his hand and drinking with his head tilted back. He had the aura of a legendary drunken poet. Princess Ming Wan's heart skipped a beat. She flew up and grabbed a wine jar from beside him. She cut off the top of the jar with her palm. What's the point of drinking alone? I'll drink with you. Originally, when Shwe Elan saw her coming up, his fingers moved, wanting to throw her down. But after hearing her words, he didn't have the intention to throw her down. He just raised the wine jug, okay. The two wine jars collided in the air and some wine flew out and splashed onto their hands. Chapter 1164. Shui Ilan did not care, and neither did Princess Ming Wan. The two of them stood and drank without speaking. 2 jugs of wine went into their stomachs. Princess Ming Wan was not good at drinking, and after drinking this jug of strong wine, her face was as red as the morning sun. Shui Ilan drank even more, but his alcohol tolerance was astonishing. He had already drunk 5 jugs of wine, but he did not feel drunk at all. Instead, his eyes were brighter. "Palace Master, can you not get drunk?" Princess Ming Wan was curious. After drinking this jug of wine, her vision was already a little blurry. "I wish that I could get drunk." Shui Ilan smiled bitterly. His gaze was distant as he looked at the large hall where Ning Xuemore lived. It was as if he could see through the night into her room. She actually can't remember anything. Those were her favorite places in the past. "Are you saying that Miss Ning lost her memory?" Ming Wan was puzzled. Shui Ilan suddenly stood up and smiled coldly. "It would be good if it was just memory loss." His sleeves fluttered, and he floated down like a red cloud. He raised his head and sang, "The sun rises from the east, and my red clothes are like fire." His voice was magnetic and slightly hoarse, and it had a kind of soul-sucking flavor. Princess Ming Wan sat on the roof of the large hall and was stunned as she listened. She did not know why, but a sense of desolation rose in her heart. She did not know if it was for Shui Ilan or for herself. Time flowed like water in the mountain valley. In the blink of an eye, Ning Xuemore had been kidnapped and brought here for 2 months. Her injuries were almost healed, and Princess Ming Wan had been sent away by Shui Ilan. Princess Ming Wan was the first to leave the valley alive. The other doctors did not even have the chance to walk out alive. They were all killed by Shui Ilan. When Imperial Princess Ming Wan was sent away, she was caught off guard. She chatted with Ning Xuemore for a long time, and after checking her pulse, she knew that her injuries were almost healed. She then came out to report the good news to Shui Ilan. She did not expect that just as she finished speaking, she would feel dizzy. In her daze, she heard Shui Ilan say a few words in her ear. "Ming Wan, you are the first to leave my palm alive. You are smart. When you go back, don't say anything." Imperial Princess Ming Wan herself did not know how long she had been unconscious for. Only when she was hastily woken up by a young servant girl beside her did she open her eyes and discover that she had returned to her boudoir. Almost nothing in her room had changed. The only thing that had changed was her mood. After Royal Princess Ming Wan returned, she naturally did not mention anything about what had happened in the past 2 months. She only said that she had a mental cultivation method that she could not solve, so she found a secluded place to cultivate in seclusion for 2 months. She had also cultivated in seclusion before, so no one doubted her words. Nothing much had happened in the Bright King residence during her absence for 2 months. After she took over, things quickly went back to normal. Those 2 months of life as a servant girl were like a dream to her. However, this dream seemed to have taken away her soul, making her remember the red-robed man. She had secretly sent people to look for that valley nearby, but they could not find it. There was not even a place that looked like it. It was obvious that the valley was not nearby. Perhaps it was not even on this mainland. The Bright King residence was well informed. The news of Ning Xuemore's disappearance in the Sun Moon sect had also spread to the pugilistic world. According to the rumors, Ning Xuemore had been injured and kidnapped by a demon in the Sun Moon sect. No one knew if she was dead or alive. However, everyone guessed that she was dead because there was a lot of blood at the scene. Chapter 1165. Looking at the situation, it was highly likely that after she was assassinated, the demon used poison to dissolve her corpse. That was why the disciples of the Sun Moon sect could not find a single trace of her clothes even after searching the entire continent. In this year, Ning Xuemore had turned from a good-for-nothing into a genius. She had also subdued the divine beast Chelene and entered the ancestors' tutelage. All sorts of miraculous encounters had made her a legendary figure in this continent. Now that they heard that she had ended up in such a state, everyone could not help but sigh. She had become the hottest topic of conversation after meals. Princess Ming-Wan did not say anything and continued to handle all the family affairs as usual. The only thing that worried her was her precious little brother, Shi-ju. After that little brat heard about Ning Xuemo's situation, he seemed to have lost his soul and shut himself in his room for a day. After a day, he disappeared and left a note for her. "I don't believe that she's dead. I want to find her. I'll come back once I find her." 3 exclamation marks in a row expressed his determination. Princess Ming-Wan could not help but facepalm. Whether Ning Xuemo was alive or dead, her precious little brother had no hope at all. Had this little brat been blinded by love? She had no choice but to send people to look for this troublesome little brat. Of course, this also gave her the convenience of openly searching for that valley. Ning Xuemo naturally did not know about the storm outside. She was almost going crazy from being cooped up in that valley every day. When Princess Ming-Wan was around, there was someone to talk to, so she was not too bored. However, after Princess Ming-Wan left, there was only her and Shui Ilan left in the entire valley. This made her have the urge to tear open the barrier and escape at all times. After Shui Ilan recovered his memories, his martial arts had improved greatly after a year of recuperation. He had basically recovered all the martial arts he had in his previous life. He also studied Shinjoli's barrier fiercely. After studying and studying, he himself became an expert in setting up barriers. The bounded domain he had set up was extremely dense and firm. It was not much worse than the bounded domain set up by Shinjoli. Although Ning Xuemo's injuries had almost healed, her telekinesis had been sealed by Shui Ilan. She now had the mobility of an ordinary person, but she couldn't break the enchantment. Naturally, she couldn't escape. 2 months of time might be just a string of numbers to others, but to her, every single day was a torment. Ning Xuemo still had Shinjoli's sound-transmitting talisman, but she had never been able to contact him. 3 months. She had been separated from him for 3 whole months. Shinjoli had asked her to wait for half a month before he left, but now there was no news from him for 3 months. She was now isolated from the rest of the world. She had no idea whether Shinjoli had returned to the mountain or whether he was looking for her like a madman. Longing was like weeds, drifting further and further away. Without separation, one wouldn't know the feeling of yearning. Ning Xuemo had never thought that she would miss someone so much in her life. Every day, when she opened and closed her eyes, she would see his shadow. That night, she had a nightmare. In the dream, she finally saw Shinjoli. In the dream, he walked into a mountain. The mountain was like the legendary flaming mountain. There were burning flames everywhere. Shinjoli seemed to have cast a spell similar to the art of avoiding fire. From time to time, various flaming monsters jumped out to attack him. They were all quickly killed by him. He seemed to have consumed a lot of his physical strength. His face was getting paler and paler, and his killing speed was slightly slower. Chapter 1166. Ning Xuemo watched as he dealt with the flaming beasts. Her heart was raised high, fearing that he would not be able to endure and fall down. Looking at the situation, Shinjoli seemed to be looking for something in the mountains. He traversed one mountain after another, exploring every place he passed, but he was disappointed. In the end, he walked to a crevice between 2 mountains. The crevice was only 2 feet wide, but it was unfathomably deep. From time to time, blazing red flames would spurt out from the crevice. It was as beautiful as a volcanic eruption. Shinjoli looked into the crevice. Suddenly, he jumped into the crevice. Ning Xuemo, who was in her dream, almost screamed out loud. Shinjoli's white clothes were especially dazzling in the blazing flames. Probably because he had exhausted too much of his energy, his face was frighteningly pale. The flames had also burned the corners of his clothes. However, he ignored them and went down. Finally, he reached the bottom of the crevice. Then, he bent down to pick the red herb on the mountain wall. Just as his fingers touched the herb, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the sky. That bolt of lightning directly hit Shinjoli, who was in the crevice, and made his body tremble. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky above the crevice. The originally clear sky was suddenly covered with large purple clouds. These clouds were spinning crazily in the sky. Every time they collided, a bolt of lightning would strike down. Every bolt of lightning would accurately strike into the crevice and strike Shinjoli. The crevice was narrow. Although it was difficult for Shinjoli to turn sideways inside, he could still fly forward or jump backward to dodge the lightning. However, she did not expect that he would ignore the lightning and bend down to pick the herb. When he finally picked the herb, there were already 3 bolts of lightning that struck him directly. He faced the lightning and jumped up. The golden lightning was like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Every bolt of lightning struck the pale white barrier around his body, causing his face to become paler and paler. When he finally jumped out of the crevice, an even bigger golden ball of lightning struck down. The lightning was so bright that Ning Shuamore had never seen it before. It was as bright as a big round table. Ning Shuamore was so nervous that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. She couldn't help but scream, "Guru, be careful." Her voice wasn't soft at all. Her ears were buzzing from the noise, and all the scenes in her dream disappeared. Nightmares? She had just opened her eyes, sweating profusely, when someone grabbed her wrist. The grip was a little strong, causing her wrist to hurt. Shwe Ilan was standing beside her bed, looking down at her with a faint smile on his lips, but there was no smile in his eyes. "It's none of your business." Ning Shuamore took a deep breath and tried to pull her hand back. Shwe Ilan was very strong this time. He pulled her up from the bed. "Come with me, I'll take you to see something." In a cool hall, there was a crystal ball. Shwe Ilan dragged Ning Shuamore to this place. He only let go of her hand when they entered the hall. The door of the hall closed behind them, leaving only the 2 of them in the hall. Ning Shuamore couldn't help but take a few steps back. She looked at Shwe Ilan cautiously. "What do you want me to see?" She had just woken up and was dragged here by Shwe Ilan. Her hair was still messy, and her clothes were a little messy. She looked a little embarrassed. She rubbed her wrist. Shwe Ilan's actions were a little rough, so her wrist was swollen. Now that she had recovered, she felt a burning pain. Chapter 1167. Shwe Ilan looked at her bruised wrist and paused. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he closed his mouth and walked forward. "Come with me." Ning Shuamore didn't know what he was trying to do, so she fell back a few steps and followed him to the crystal ball. "Come, put your hand on the crystal ball." Shwe Ilan moved to the side to make room for her. Ning Shuamore finally saw the crystal ball in its entirety. The crystal ball was about the size of a basketball. Inside the crystal ball, there seemed to be a colorful fog faintly rising. Within the fog, there seemed to be countless moving scenes. The speed of the crystal ball was 100 times faster than a merry-go-round. Just looking at it slightly made people feel dizzy. The crystal ball looked like a prop used by wizards in movies. Ning Shuamore took a step back and frowned. "What are you trying to do? Put your hand on the crystal ball and you'll understand." Shwe Ilan reached out to pull her. "Be good and listen to me." If she put her hand on the crystal ball, he might use some evil magic to control her. How could Ning Shuamore fall for his trick? She immediately took a few steps back. "Just say it." She took a few steps away from the crystal ball. She felt that the crystal ball had a trace of evil aura, and her heart beat faster when she got close to it. Shwe Ilan waved his hand, and Ning Shuamore couldn't help but stumble forward a few steps. She directly bumped into the table where the crystal ball was placed. If she didn't want to be hit, she could only press her hand on the crystal ball to stabilize her body. Shwe Ilan had this idea. He thought that Ning Shuamore's hand would definitely reach out to press the crystal ball, but he didn't expect that she would put her hand behind her back and use her stomach to hit the table. By the time Shwe Ilan realized that something was wrong and wanted to stop her, it was already too late. He only heard a muffled bang and Ning Shuamore let out a low cry. Her body bent and she directly threw herself onto the crystal ball. The force of her impact was not small. She actually knocked the huge crystal ball onto the table and rolled towards the ground. Had it not been for Elan's figure flashing and his hand catching the crystal ball in time, he was afraid that this precious ball that he had spent several months to make would have been smashed into smithereen. This girl did it on purpose. She wanted to destroy his crystal ball. Elan was furious. His handsome face darkened and a storm seemed to gather in his eyes. Ning Xuemo, you're courting death. He paused halfway through his reprimand, and his gaze fell on Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo's stomach also hurt from the impact, and it also shook the wound on her chest. She almost spat out a mouthful of blood, and large beads of cold sweat appeared on her forehead. At this moment, she was bending over and looking at him coldly. Her face was extremely pale, and her eyes were ice cold. Elan's heart inexplicably trembled, and he couldn't continue reprimanding her. Elan. Ning Xuemo said word by word, and her gaze was cold. I advise you not to waste your effort. I'm Ning Xuemo, and I'm not anyone else. And I won't turn into anyone else. She forced herself to straighten her body, turned around, and left. Although she didn't know what Elan wanted to do, he kept calling her Momo and said that he wanted to make her remember everything. Now that he had made this crystal ball and asked her to place her hand on it, it was obvious that he wanted to cast some kind of spell on her. Who knows, he might be able to transfer that Momo's memory to her. Perhaps a person had a past life, or perhaps countless past lives. Perhaps in every life, they had entangled with many people and married many people. But what did that mean? Chapter 1168. Since she drank Meng Po's soup and forgot about her previous life, there was no need for her to be entangled with her past life. Whether or not Momo was her past life, she didn't want to know. She didn't want to bear all of her grudges, she also didn't want to have her memories and make things difficult for herself in this life. Therefore, Ning Xuemo was very repulsed by the crystal ball and Elan's method. It was a pity that her psychokinesis was sealed. Otherwise, she would have already fought with Elan and escaped. Elan probably didn't expect that Ning Xuemo would have such a big reaction. He stared blankly for a moment. By the time he came back to his senses, Ning Xuemo had already walked to the door, preparing to open it and leave. His eyes darkened. After preparing for so long, how could he give up just because Ning Xuemo wasn't willing? His body moved slightly and in the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Ning Xuemo. He pulled her back to the crystal ball and coldly said, Momo, today you have to do it even if you don't want to. He was afraid that she would resist again, so he simply held her hand and forced her to press it on the crystal ball. The crystal ball seemed to have a strong suction force. The moment Ning Xuemo's hand was pressed on it, she couldn't pull it back anymore. There seemed to be waves of magnetic waves from the crystal ball surging into her mind, making her head feel like it was filled with water. It was so painful that it felt like it was going to explode. She couldn't help but scream. She hurriedly tried to pull her hand back, but before she could do so, Elan pressed her other hand on the crystal ball. Momo, I'm sorry. It might be a little painful, but this is what you have to bear. Bear with it, and it will be over. Elan's voice was like a demon's voice that pierced through her chaotic mind. Bear with it, your sister. After Ning Xuemo pressed both of her hands on the crystal ball, she felt as if 2 electric drills were inserted into her brain at the same time. It was as if there was a high-pressure water jet inside the electric drill, spraying out countless images into her brain. It was so crowded that her brain felt like it was going to explode. She couldn't help but curse. Excruciating pain. He had never experienced such intense pain before. The sharp pain caused Ning Xuemo to break out in a cold sweat. Her face was as white as snow, and then it turned as red as a tomato. Her body was trembling so badly that she could barely stand. Elan's gaze fell on her face, and a trace of pity flashed across his eyes. His Momo. He didn't want his Momo to suffer like this, but if he didn't do this, she wouldn't have recovered her memories from her previous life and wouldn't be able to stay by his side at ease. He stretched out his hand, and the black wave zither appeared on his lap. Ding ding dong dong, he began to play. Following the sound of the zither, The images that entered Ning Shuamor's mind gradually became clearer. It was as if shredded film was being reconnected and glued back together. It was played in sequence. The still images connected together to form an animation of blood and fire, love and hate intertwined together. Those were the memories of another girl. They were as long as a serial, flashing through her mind and attacking her original memories. Due to the interference of the zither, Ning Shuamor's head finally stopped hurting. She didn't know when her body stopped trembling, but she stood there in a daze. Her back was as straight as a javelin. Her face began to return to normal. Shuer Ilan glanced at her while he was playing the zither. Seeing her like this, he let out a sigh of relief and lowered his eyes to play seriously. The melodious sound of the zither was like the wind blowing through the treetops, constantly ringing in Ning Shuamor's ears. Chapter 1169. The sound of the zither continued for an entire day. When it finally came to an end, the hall fell into true silence. It was so quiet that even the breathing of the two people could not be heard. Shuer Ilan had obviously used some kind of spell when he was playing the zither, and it consumed a lot of MF. After an entire day, his face was extremely pale, and there were even traces of blood seeping out from the corner of his lips. However, he only used his sleeves to wipe it off. His eyes were fixed on Ning Shuamor's face, as if he was a child waiting for the results of an exam. Ning Shuamor stood there with her eyes lowered. Her face was as pale as snow, and she was looking at her hands. When the sound of the zither stopped, the crystal ball seemed to have lost its effect as well, and she could finally withdraw her hands. The crystal ball on the table seemed to have been sucked dry of all its spiritual energy, and it turned into a dull grey color, like a stone without spirituality. Ning Shuamor did not move for a long time. Shuer Ilan finally could not hold it in anymore. Momo. Ning Shuamor did not seem to hear him. Shuer Ilan did not give up and called out again, much louder this time. Ning Shuamor slowly raised her head. Her eyes were as dark as the night, but the corners of her lips slowly pulled into a smile. Shuer Ilan, the 9D blockbuster you showed me was not bad. It was very exciting. Shuer Ilan. He did not understand the key words she said. 9D blockbuster? Ning Shuamor yawned. Even if I told you, you wouldn't understand. In short, the drama you rehearsed was very logical, melodramatic, emotional, and able to move people's emotions. It made people feel as if they were in the real world. However, a drama is just a drama and not real life. Therefore, after watching it and being moved, we should just do what we should do. She strode out. I'm sleepy after watching this for an entire day. Shuer Ilan finally reacted. He rushed over and stood in front of her. Momo, do you think what you're seeing isn't real? Ning Shuamor took a step back and looked at him calmly. Well, let's just treat it as real. I'll just treat it as watching a documentary. So what? That Momo isn't me. Even if you force her memory on me, it's not me, that's you. Your past life. You're Shueri Mo. Ning Shuamor raised her eyebrows and smiled. Do you think that if you force her memory on me, I will become her? Shuer Ilan, why did he feel that something was amiss? Ning Shuamor recovered Shuer Yimo's memories. Shouldn't it be Shuer Yimo? Shouldn't it be? Should it be? Even if she didn't throw herself into his arms after such a long time, she shouldn't be treating him like this. Her reaction was no different than if she hadn't recovered her past life's memory. It was rare for him to be in a daze. Ning Shuamor took advantage of his daze to open the door and go out. The sun outside was just right. The midday sun shone on her body, making her feel warm. Ning Shuamor remembered that when Shuer Ilan forcefully pulled her into the hall, it was close to noon. She didn't expect that after watching the film for an entire day, when she came out, it was already noon of the next day. The hall was quite cold. She had stayed in there for an entire day and felt that she was about to be frozen. When she came out just now, even her bones were emitting cold air. She stretched her almost stiff body under the sunlight and took a light breath. She completely emptied her mind and closed her eyes to enjoy the sunlight. After staying in a dark place for so long, she had long been longing for sunlight. Fresh memories that didn't belong to her stirred in her mind. Chapter 1170. Just as that thought was about to surface, she immediately suppressed it. Ning Xuemo. You are Ning Xuemo, a secret agent from the 21st century. You are not some demon princess. You should not let her story affect your life in this life. In his previous life, before and after this life, if he were to be entangled in this life, how would he be able to live? Ning Xuemo walked slowly under the sunlight, as if she was casually admiring the beautiful scenery around her. She looked very carefree. But what about her heart? She sat down on a stone bench. Little flowers bloomed under her feet, swaying gently in the wind. She suddenly recognized that this place was the scenery of the back garden of the Demon Palace. In the past, Shui Yimo often took Shui Yilan to play here. Shui Yilan combed her hair and weaved garlands for her. However, there was no sunlight in the Demon Palace. There was only the demon light deliberately created by the demon ancestor. That demon light was pale white and could not be compared to normal sunlight. However, it also had the ability to promote the growth of flowers and plants. In the back garden of the Demon Palace, all kinds of flowers and plants bloomed vigorously and luxuriantly. Ning Xuemo suddenly stood up. Damn it! She said that she would not be affected by her previous life. Why did she unconsciously recall those memories that did not belong to her? She walked with large strides to the palace where she was currently staying. Sleep, she wanted to sleep. After she left, Shui Yilan appeared in the same place. He looked at Ning Xuemo's departing figure with deep eyes. The memories in the crystal ball did not seem to affect her much. This was really out of his expectations. Could it be that there was an accident with the crystal ball that he made? She did not completely absorb the things inside. He wanted to check the crystal ball again, but that thing could only be used once. Using it once would exhaust all the energy inside. Even if he wanted to check it again, he would not be able to see anything. Therefore, as powerful as he was, he could not detect how much Ning Xuemo had received about Shui Yimo's memories. Ning Xuemo slept for half a month. Shui Yilan came to visit her many times, but she was always asleep. He knew that forcibly instilling memories of Snowy Moon into her mind was, after all, an act of defiance against the will of the heavens. It would harm her own brain as well. Right now, her deep sleep was a form of self-recovery. She should be fine after sleeping for a few days. Shui Yilan's initial estimate was that she would sleep for 7 to 8 days, but he didn't expect her to sleep for so long. A few days later, he wanted to wake her up several times, but he gave up after thinking about it. Sleeping wouldn't kill her. She would wake up when she had enough sleep, and she would have to face everything when she woke up. Momo, you just don't want to accept this fact now. When you really come back to your senses, you'll understand that you actually love me. For me, you even gave your body to that person, just to obtain his heart's blood. Momo, we should be a couple. We were in our previous life, and we should be even more so in this life. Shui Yilan's finger lightly brushed against Ning Xuemo's sleeping face as he spoke in a low voice. Great God! Ning Xuemo suddenly murmured in her sleep. Shui Yilan's fingers stiffened. His eyes flashed with anger. She had already recovered her memories of Snowy Moon, but she was still thinking about that person. He reached out his hand as if to do something, but after thinking about it, he gave up. He turned around and walked out. Ning Xuemo slowly opened her eyes. She had already woken up when Shui Yilan sat down, but she was unwilling to open her eyes. She had also heard Shui Yilan's whispers. Her heart felt as if it had been pierced by something, but she remained calm and collected. Chapter 1171. After being trapped by Shui Yilan's side for so long, her skill at pretending to be asleep had already reached perfection. After Shui Yilan left, she got up and leaned against the bedpost. She raised her hand to rub her eyebrows, somewhat worried. Even if those memories were all true, and she had loved Shui Yilan in her past life, she really had no feelings for him in this life. She had fallen in love with the great god in this life, and it seemed like she had fallen in love with him miserably. Could it be that she felt guilty towards the great god in her past life, so she fell in love with him in this life to compensate him? No, although she had wronged the great god in her past life, The great god had also mercilessly punished her afterwards. She had even sacrificed her life for this, so she had repaid what she owed the great god. Her love for him in this life wasn't compensation. She bitterly smiled and shook her head. People said that they could only love one person in every life, but she seemed to have loved two people. The one she loved in her past life didn't love in this life, but the one she didn't love in her past life fell in love in this life. Was the heavens playing with her? Ning Xuemore was somewhat depressed by these romantic thoughts, and she raised her hand to hit her head. Forget it. Don't think about it anymore. Block soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. In this life, she only wanted to live according to her heart, and didn't want to be tied down by too many things. She had already died in her previous life. Death was the end of everything. Why would she have to pay for her past life in this life? It wasn't as if her brain had been kicked by a donkey, but it was strange. Shui Yimo was her past life, and that was because Shui Yimo had died. It was normal for her to reincarnate without Shui Yimo's memories, so why didn't the great god remember her? Ning Xuemore touched her face. Her current appearance was almost the same as Shui Yimo's appearance in her memory. Shui Yimo and the great god had such a deep connection, so logically speaking, he shouldn't have forgotten her. Ning Xuemore thought about how she had met the great god. The great god's attitude towards her didn't seem to be fake, so he shouldn't have completely forgotten her. Although it had been 3,000 years, according to the great god's terrifying memory, he shouldn't have forgotten her completely. Could it be that the great god also lost his memory? Or could it be that Shinjoli had also reincarnated? No. His name was still the same. It didn't seem like he had reincarnated. That meant that the Almighty had also lost his memory. Ning Xuemore sat on the bed and pondered for a long time. Finally, she came to a reasonable conclusion. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. The three of them were rather interesting. The sealed one, the reincarnated one, and the amnesiac one. Originally, the three of them were not supposed to have any more interactions. Who would have thought that under this mishap, their fates would be entangled once again? Now that she and Shui Ilan had recovered their memories, would Shinjoli also recover one day? How would he treat her after he recovered? Would he still be as cold and heartless to her as he was in her previous life? Watching her die an unnatural death without doing anything? She took a deep breath and sorted out her messy thoughts. Then, she rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She didn't want to care about her previous life anymore. She only wanted to grasp the present and live in the present. However, the death of her previous life was like a thorn in her heart, making her unable to let go for a while. Thinking about it again, in her previous life, she had let the great god down first. Then, the way he treated her afterwards could be considered reasonable. She shouldn't bother about it. In this life, the great god was really good to her. If she were to dwell on the past, then she wouldn't be free and easy. After thinking about it for a while, her hand inadvertently touched the cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. Chapter 1172. Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat. She had already removed her identity as the Almighty's concubine, but she didn't expect that this cinnabar mole still existed. It was just that it had become a real cinnabar mole and didn't have the original contract function. Her real identity now was Shinjoli's disciple. Ning Xuemore hugged her knees as she sat there. At this moment, her thoughts drifted far away. Speaking of which, how was the Almighty now? Had he come back? If he had come back, with the Almighty's abilities, he should have been able to find her after so long. Did something really happen to the Almighty? Thinking of this, her heart began to burn again. She hated herself for being locked up in such a secluded place where she couldn't even see a strand of hair. She couldn't even find out about the Almighty's whereabouts. No, she couldn't let Shui Ilan lock her up like this. She couldn't just sit there and wait for death. Ning Xuemore sat calmly for a moment and started to think of a way to escape. The flowers in the forest withered, and it was another year of green. Unknowingly, a year had passed. In this year, Ning Xuemore used the excuse of walking around to explore every corner, but she couldn't find a crack that could break through the wizardry barrier. Therefore, with her current abilities, She could basically eliminate the idea of breaking through the wizardry barrier. Shwe Ilan went missing for a month. After he came back, he returned to his usual self and often came to visit her. He would often ignore her objections and take her out for a walk. During the walk, he would talk to her and test her to see how much she had recovered. However, Ning Xuemore hid her emotions too well. Basically, not a single drop of water leaked out. Shwe Ilan had been beating around the bush for several days, but he still couldn't get any answers. Every time he saw her, his gaze became deeper and deeper. His gaze was like that of a lone wolf, looking at her as if he was looking at meat hidden in a glass jar. There were a few times when he wanted to use his wolf claws to take the meat out of the jar and eat it up. Ning Xuemore's heart would be alarmed every time she saw him. She started to use all kinds of methods to deal with him. Shwe Ilan couldn't figure out her attitude towards him. She tried her best not to anger him so that he would not have the chance to transform into a wolf. Occasionally, when Shwe Ilan couldn't hold himself back and was about to throw caution to the wind, her charming face would become taut, and she would take on the style of Snowdress Mo. She looked at Shwe Ilan with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Little Lanshan, even you want to force me? Is this how you treat me?" Usually, Shwe Ilan's body would stiffen and he would slowly turn around and leave. Ning Xuemore knew that this was a bit cruel to Shwe Ilan, but she had no other choice. She didn't love him, but the conventional way of rejecting Shwe Ilan was useless. Her attitude towards Shwe Ilan seemed to be distant, and her memories of her previous life were also vague. This made Shwe Ilan unable to grasp her feelings. Shwe Ilan wasn't a very patient person. Ning Xuemore's dealings with him made him very unhappy, but he didn't want to vent his anger on her, so he often went out, and every time he went out, he would be gone for several days. When he came back, he would look at Ning Xuemore's attitude, and he would find in despair that she was still the same. Naturally, he also thought of the twin life curse. In his moment of despair, he even secretly used it on her, hoping that she would treat him better the next day. Even if she wasn't affectionate towards him, at least she wouldn't be so cold to him. But he didn't expect that his twin life curse, which had worked every time, would have no effect on Ning Xuemore. When she woke up, she was still the same. Chapter 1173. Of course, there were times when he couldn't bear it any longer. Ning Xuemore used Shwe Yimo's voice to talk to him, but it was useless. He directly threw himself at her. He thought that she would struggle vigorously and curse him loudly, but unexpectedly, she didn't move at all. She only coldly looked at him and said, "Shwe Ilan, you can have me, but the moment you get what you want will be the moment I die. I mean what I say." Shwe Ilan naturally didn't believe her. With his methods, it wasn't difficult to stop a person from committing suicide. But Ning Xuemore's next words made his enthusiasm turn to ice. "Shwe Ilan, I know you have great ability. But you can stop me for a while, but you can't stop me for a lifetime. If I really want to die, there will always be an opportunity. In any case, I already died for you in my previous life. If I'm forced to die by you in this life, it can only be considered my bad luck." Shwe Ilan naturally didn't want her to die. Her last two sentences accurately hit his weak spot, so he could only resentfully stop. He got up and straightened his robes. Looking down at her lying there, he said, "Momo, in this life, I will make you fall in love with me again. I will use proper means to obtain you." "I'll wait and see," Ning Xuemore said. Her heart finally relaxed. Since then, Shwe Ilan didn't force her, but he also didn't have any intention of letting her go. He seemed to be going all out with her. He didn't believe that if he imprisoned her here, the two of them wouldn't fall in love with him again. Ning Xuemore lived here for a long time and finally understood that this place should be an enchantment created by Shwe Ilan. It shouldn't be anywhere on the continent. In other words, this was a new space created by Shwe Ilan. People from the outside wouldn't be able to find this place, because the climate here didn't change with the 4 seasons. The surrounding plants were also full of vitality all year round, maintaining the same appearance. Only time was flowing here. During this year, Ning Xuemore's acupoints for practicing psyche power had been sealed, so she could not continue practicing. Her physical strength had also declined unknowingly. By the time Shui Ilan realized this, she had already fallen seriously ill. This illness came with a vengeance, and the timing of her illness wasn't right. It was when Shui Ilan went out. When Shui Ilan returned after wandering outside for 3 days, she had already fainted due to a high fever. Shui Ilan's medical skills were not high. At most, he could treat injuries and so on. His medical skills were basically focused on the constitution of demons. On the other hand, Ning Xuemore was a standard human. Even if she had been forced into the memories of snowy snow, she was still a human. A human's constitution was relatively weak. If they weren't careful, they could lose their life. Shui Ilan didn't dare to take this risk. Only now did he realize that Ning Xuemore's psychokinesis was currently at Earth Realm Level 7. Once a human of this level reached Earth Realm Level 8, their physique would undergo a huge change. Not only would they have a lifespan of 1,000 years, but they would also not get sick easily. Level 7 was a more awkward stage. The constitution had already begun to change, but the body couldn't accept this change. Once a cultivator of this level lost their psyche power, their constitution wouldn't even be as healthy as a normal person's. Ning Xuemore's psyche power had been sealed by him for a year. It was as if he had blocked her meridians. If it continued for a long time, it would directly cause her to become a cripple, and even her life would be in danger. Ning Xuemore's illness only started to fall ill after a year. Her vitality was already very tenacious. Chapter 1174. By the time Shui Ilan returned, she had been unconscious for 3 days and was on the brink of death from the fever. Shui Ilan's heart was filled with regret as he waited on her for 5 days. He even caught 4 or 5 famous doctors to treat her. Because her illness was not a common cold, the doctors gave her countless prescriptions to treat the cold. Shui Ilan fed her countless bowls of herbal medicine, but in the end, she became even weaker. In the end, it was one of the doctors who reminded Shui Ilan, "Look, this lady's psychokinesis is not low. Has she reached Earth rank level 7? I heard that if people of this level have poor psychokinesis, they will easily fall sick." Shui Ilan suddenly realized that he had finally unsealed Ning Xuemore's psychokinesis that had been sealed for a year. Ning Xuemore's blood vessels were severely clogged. Although her psychokinesis had been unsealed, it could not be used properly. Shui Ilan did not dare to blindly use his psychokinesis to treat her, so he could only watch over her in fear. Fortunately, Ning Xuemore's vitality was still very strong. After her psychokinesis was unsealed, it automatically flowed slowly in her body. 5 days later, she finally struggled back from the brink of death. After this incident, Shui Ilan did not dare to seal her psychokinesis anymore. Considering that he could not find anyone to take care of her when he was away, it would be easy for problems to arise. Therefore, he thought of another way. He caught 4 girls from outside to be her maids and take care of her daily life. These 4 girls came from poor families and were illiterate. When they came, Shui Ilan cut off their tongues and turned them mute. Therefore, Shui Ilan was not afraid that these 4 girls would leak information about the outside world to Ning Xuemore. At first, Ning Xuemore thought that the people she had been waiting for had finally arrived and that she could understand the situation. However, after seeing the condition of the 4 girls, she felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head, freezing her from head to toe. She no longer placed her hopes on outsiders. She could only rely on herself. She had always been extremely cold towards these 4 girls, because she was afraid that if she got too close to them, Shui Ilan would use their safety to threaten her. At that time, their fates would be even more worrying. After Ning Xuemore's psyche power was restored, her body was much stronger, and her illness was finally getting better. She secretly used telepathy to contact Kirin a few more times, but she still couldn't reach him. She was now in a typical state of being isolated from the world. No matter how anxious she was, she couldn't go out, let alone contact anyone she was familiar with. She became depressed and shut herself in her room every day, refusing to say a word. When Shui Ilan first came to see her, she could still reply to him. Later on, She couldn't be bothered to talk to him anymore. Even if he said 10 sentences, she wouldn't reply to him. Even if she said something occasionally, it would be she wants to go out. Shwe Ilan didn't have any intention of agreeing, so she became even more silent. She became thinner day by day, and very soon, she was as thin as a yellow flower. This Cold War lasted for more than a month. In the end, Shwe Ilan couldn't bear to see her torment herself like this, so he promised to bring her out twice a year. However, the condition was that she had to cultivate diligently and nurse her body back to health. Shwe Ilan finally brought her out of the enchantment. However, the place he brought her to wasn't the Tien Ci continent, but the immortal country. Ning Xuemor had been here twice, and it was the Almighty who brought her here. Revisiting the old place, the scenery here was the same as before, but the person beside her was different. Things had changed, and it was truly a feeling that things were still the same, but people had changed. Shwe Ilan was probably afraid that she would do something funny, so when he brought her out, not only did he seal her acupoints, but he also changed her appearance. He also changed his appearance. Chapter 1175. It had to be said that Shwe Ilan's disguise technique was extremely brilliant. Ning Xuemor was disguised as an ordinary young girl by him, while he himself was disguised as a simple young man. He held her hand and looked like a young man and woman from the countryside who had eloped. When these two people walked on the streets of the Immortal Kingdom, they didn't stand out at all. Ning Xuemor's mute acupoint had been sealed, and her psychokinesis was sealed again. She could only walk like a normal person. She ran to crowded places, and the bustling crowd gave her a sense of familiarity. It was only at this moment that she realized what the saying humans are social animals meant. Now that she had returned to the crowd, even if she couldn't communicate, she still had the urge to cry. Shwe Ilan had been following her closely, and he didn't lose sight of her at all. Ning Xuemor naturally didn't have the chance to communicate with anyone alone. When it was time for lunch, Shwe Ilan chose the largest restaurant in the area. The two of them were dressed like country bumpkins, and their appearance also carried a kind of rustic aura. However, when they arrived at the most expensive restaurant, they were almost stopped by the waiter at the entrance. Shwe Ilan threw out a handful of crystal beads, which immediately lit up the waiter's eyes. He bowed and welcomed the two of them in. Shwe Ilan originally wanted a single room, but Ning Xuemor insisted on eating in the hall on the second floor. Ning Xuemor couldn't communicate with people normally right now, so it was good to be able to listen to them talk. Restaurants had always been a place for gossip. She might be able to hear some news about Shunjioli here. She had missed him so much in the past year that she almost went crazy. When she came, she was still holding on to the possibility that she might bump into Shunjioli here. What if he came here to look for her? After all, she and Shunjioli had come to this restaurant before. The great god had even peeled crabs for her here, and she had even smeared crab roe on her hand. It was also here that she had given him the moonlight sword. He had even teased her, saying that she had given him her dowry so early. However, she was disappointed in the end. There were many people in the hall, but there was no sign of him. She couldn't even find a figure that resembled him. She had heard a lot of gossip here, but none of it was about him. It was all about the business and family, and there was nothing to remember. Shwe Ilan probably wanted to win her favor, so he ordered a table full of her favorite dishes and accompanied her to drink a few bottles of wine. Ning Xuemor had been locked up by him for more than a year, so she rarely smiled. Now, she finally smiled a little more. However, she would occasionally stare at the neighboring table in a daze, as if she was deep in thought. He also glanced at the neighboring table. There was a couple there. The man was handsome, and the woman was beautiful. They looked like a perfect couple. The two of them looked very loving, but there was nothing special about them. He turned to look at Ning Xuemor's plate. He had also picked up a lot of food for her. Although she didn't refuse, she didn't taste a single thing. She obviously didn't accept his kindness. His fingers holding the chopsticks were somewhat pale, and there seemed to be a trace of pain in the depths of his eyes. She had clearly recovered her memories of Shwe Yimo, so why was she still so cold to him? Why was she still thinking about that man? He glanced at the neighboring table again, and suddenly felt that the couple's display of affection was somewhat dazzling. Shui Ilan didn't say anything. He only flicked his fingernails at the table between meals. The movement was so small that it was almost unnoticeable. Chapter 1176. Ning Xuemo's attention wasn't on him at all, so she naturally didn't see his small movements. Her ability to recognize people was very high. She would remember them for the rest of her life if they interacted with her once. She recognized the two people at the next table. More accurately, she had seen them before. When she and the great god first came here, this couple had bought a few crystal beads in a fit of pique. That man had chased after the girl and apologized for a long time. She couldn't help but laugh when she saw it, even teasing the great god beside her. It was clearly a very normal scene, but now that she thought about it, it was a happiness that she could never touch again. Great God, where are you? It's been so long, why haven't you looked for me? And I can't find you. It had been a year and a half. She and the great god had been separated for a year and a half. She hadn't heard from him for a year and a half. Was he missing her like she was? It was like a lump of iron was stuck in her heart. She felt that the food she normally liked to eat was tasteless. Her mood instantly plummeted. She finished the meal emotionlessly and stood up. Shui Ilan was a good understanding person, immediately asking, "Do you want to go somewhere else?" Ning Xuemo couldn't speak, so she could only give a slight nod. The two of them were about to go down the stairs together when they heard two putong sounds behind them. Then they heard someone cry out in alarm. Ning Xuemo unconsciously turned around and her feet froze. The couple that had been eating at the next table had fallen to the ground. Their faces were green and they were constantly twitching. They had been poisoned. The customs of the immortal nation were very simple and friendly. The guests at the other tables immediately surrounded them. Some of them even squatted down to check on the couple. A teacup suddenly flew over. It smashed into the wrist of the man who wanted to flip the couple over. That man was caught off guard and the back of his hand was bruised. He angrily raised his head. "Who hit me?" An ordinary-looking girl quickly walked over and pushed him aside. Then she wrote a few words on the ground. "Poison, you will die if you touch it." The man was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. The people around who were about to help the couple didn't dare to move. They all looked at Ning Xuemo for help. "Miss, you know medicine, right? Please save them." Ning Xuemo stared coldly at Shui Ilan. Needless to say, he was the one behind this. Shui Ilan smiled and transmitted his voice to her. "Momo, do you want to save them?" Ning Xuemo just stared at him. Shui Ilan continued, "If you want me to save them, I can do it. Give me a kiss, and I will do it." Ning Xuemo, she did not look at him again. Instead, she turned around and squatted in front of the two men. She pulled out a silver hairpin from her hair and used the tip of the hairpin to hit the two men's acupuncture points. Then, he quickly wrote down the names of a few herbs on the ground and asked the people around him to pick them up quickly. The onlookers were quite enthusiastic. Someone immediately ran over and came back with the herbs in a short amount of time. Although Ning Xuemo's psychokinesis was sealed, she was very experienced in treating patients. She was especially good at curing poisons. Even if she didn't use the special antidote, she could still use her own methods to solve the problem. Shui Ilan narrowed his eyes as he watched her busying herself. He didn't know what he was feeling. He could actually stop her from saving them with a wave of his hand, but he couldn't bear to do it when he saw her current appearance. These days, Ning Xuemo was like an expressionless doll in front of him. Her eyes were always in a daze. It was rare to see her so serious. Chapter 1177. In less than an hour, Ning Xuemo had successfully cured the couple of poison. Naturally, they were extremely grateful. The surrounding people looked at Ning Xuemo with eyes full of admiration. No matter where, a godly doctor was extremely popular. Ning Xuemo had saved two people with just a few needles. Naturally, she had become a legend. When she left the restaurant and wandered around the streets, there were already people calling her a godly doctor. There were even people who invited her to treat their relatives. There were many famous and influential people among them. Ning Xuemore had probably been holding it in for too long. Now that there was an opportunity to be in close contact with people, she naturally wouldn't let it go. She didn't reject anyone who came. Shui Yilan was naturally unwilling. He was a devil. In his heart, Ning Xuemore was also a devil. It had always been the devil who harmed people. He had never heard of a devil who frequently saved people. He wanted to stop her, but when he saw Ning Xuemore's excited expression, he couldn't bear to do so. In the end, he decided to forget it. It was rare for him to accompany her for a day. He would just let her be happy. Thus, even though he was unwilling, he still became Ning Xuemore's follower. One day flew by while Ning Xuemore was in the process of treating and saving people. When the sky turned dark, Ning Xuemore had already treated 5 to 6 patients. Almost all of them were cured. Thus, her reputation spread even more. There were more people who came to seek treatment because of her reputation. Naturally, there were people who respectfully asked for Ning Xuemore's name. Ning Xuemore couldn't answer, and Shui Yilan didn't bother to answer. Thus, those people didn't get anything out of Ning Xuemore. They felt that Ning Xuemore was even more mysterious. Thus, they gave her the title of Nameless Godly Doctor. Ning Xuemore didn't expect that she would make a name for herself. When she saved the couple, it was only because the couple reminded her of the Almighty. She couldn't bear to see the couple disappear just like that. Thus, she didn't think too much before she saved them. But later on, she consciously established her own reputation. The Almighty knew that her medical skills were outstanding. If he was really looking for her, he might come looking for her after hearing her name. With this thought in mind, she became even more enthusiastic and serious when she saw the doctor. When it was dark, Shui Yilan wanted to drag her away, but when he saw how energetic she was when she was treating patients, he held himself back. It had been a long time since he had seen her like this. When she was treating patients, even the way she looked at him had become much gentler and warmer. It was no longer as frighteningly cold. That night, when they had dinner together, she ate some of the dishes that he had picked for her for the first time. She even smiled. For this reason, Shui Yilan decided to stay here for another day. At night, the two of them entered an inn. Shui Yilan was naturally worried about leaving her alone in a room, so he directly asked for a guest room. Ning Xuemore knew that she couldn't resist, so she didn't react. Anyway, there were 2 beds in the guest room. She and Shui Yilan could take one each. After all, she had dealt with Shui Yilan for more than a year. She knew that he wouldn't force himself on her again. Shui Yilan was indeed very well behaved. He automatically laid down on a bed and didn't have any intention of disturbing Ning Xuemore. He also unsealed Ning Xuemore's mute acupoint so that she could speak to him. However, the other acupoints on her body were still sealed. Ning Xuemore couldn't shout for help. Ning Xuemore didn't plan to shout for help either. She knew that although the people in Bulao City didn't age or die, their martial arts were very shallow. They were no match for Shui Yilan. Chapter 1178. Even if she shouted for help and called for help, it would only add a few innocent lives. Moreover, if she angered him, he might directly take her back and never give her a chance to come out again. Therefore, after Ning Xuemore's mute acupoint was unsealed, she was still very calm, which made Shui Yilan feel a lot more relieved. Today, he stayed by Ning Xuemore's side, afraid that she would play tricks, so he almost didn't blink his eyes. After such a long day, he was also a bit tired and fell asleep not long after lying on the bed. He was also afraid that after he fell asleep, Ning Xuemore would look for an opportunity to escape. Thus, he used a technique to place a curse on her wrist. Ning Xuemore's movements in this room were nothing, but once she left, he would immediately be able to detect her and catch her back. The room quieted down. Ning Xuemore sat on her own bed, her gaze falling on Shui Yilan, her gaze somewhat complicated. These days, she naturally saw Shui Yilan's attitude and accommodating attitude towards her. If she said that she didn't have any feelings in her heart, that would be a lie. After all, there were still memories of her previous life. Looking at those memories, Shwe-Elan was the only one who depended on Shwe-Elan. When Shwe-Elan was seriously injured and on the verge of death, she went to the immortal world to become a spy in order to save him. In the end, she killed the great god and took his heart's blood, pulling Shwe-Elan back from the brink of death. After Shwe-Elan was revived, Shwe-Elan cherished him even more, and even had the thought of marrying him. Under the devil ancestors' auspices, they almost went through the wedding ceremony. On that day, if Shinjoli hadn't used the Snowy Talisman as a spy and brought the immortal world's people to kill their way in, catching the demon world unprepared and causing a disaster, perhaps she really would have married Shwe-Elan and become his wife. In those memories, at the very end, Shinjoli had heavily injured her and coldly watched as she was killed by the snow-robed talisman. From start to finish, he didn't even frown. As for Shwe-Elan, in order to save Shwe-Yimo, he was once again severely injured by Shinjoli and ended up being sealed. Ning Shuamore actually felt that she was quite strange. According to her memories from her previous life, she seemed to have a special liking for Shwe-Elan. Even if she didn't recover her memories, she should have a good impression of him, and even hazy feelings of love. But for some reason, she didn't like him now. She even felt a little disgusted. Even though she had regained her memory, she still didn't have that kind of feeling for him. No matter how well he treated her, she couldn't find the feeling of love for him. She only felt a little guilty when she saw him down. Occasionally, he would feel some pain in his heart. It was the pain of seeing his little brother being bullied. But guilt wasn't love. What's more, although he saved her, he also imprisoned her at the same time. He raised her like a canary and didn't give her the slightest freedom. Every time she thought of this, even that little bit of guilt would vanish. She closed her eyes and prepared to adjust her breathing. Suddenly, the shop assistant knocked on the door, saying that someone was looking for treatment. The person who was looking for treatment was very special. It was Blacksmith Yi. Ning Shuamore's heart was moved. This Blacksmith Yi was the one who made her moonlight sword. He could be considered an acquaintance. Perhaps she could ask him to pass on a message. She was about to go out when Shwe-Elan sat up and looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. You want to treat him? Ning Shuamore nodded. Saving people is like putting out a fire. I don't know when you became so compassionate. Momo, are you really a demon? Ning Shuamore sneered. I only do things according to my heart. Whether it's an immortal or a demon, it doesn't matter to me. Chapter 1179. Shwe-Elan looked at her for a long time. His eyes flickered slightly. It was unknown what he was looking at her for. Ning Shuamore simply sat there and let him look at her. Finally, she tilted her head and smiled at him. It was unknown whether it was a real smile or a taunting one. Shwe-Elan, I remember you said that you will always treat me as your master. Is this how you treat me? Shwe-Elan choked. His eyes drooped slightly and he sighed. Momo, as long as you really come back, I will always treat you as my master. But, you seem to. Ning Shuamore didn't say anything and only looked at him indifferently. That kind of gaze was similar to how Shwe-Yimo looked at him 3,000 years ago when he was incompetent. Shwe-Elan's heart was stifled and he felt pain again. Every time she showed this kind of expression, he didn't want to disobey her no matter what. It was the same now. He finally agreed to let Ning Shuamore treat Blacksmith Yi's illness. Blacksmith Yi was carried in. More than half of his left arm was broken. His whole body was dripping with blood and he was in so much pain that he almost fainted. It was said that when he was forging the sword at night, he accidentally fell on the sword he had just forged. This was a surgical operation. Ning Shuamore was very good at it, but the equipment wasn't suitable. Fortunately, she had Shwe-Elan by her side. This guy knew metal attribute magic. According to Ning Shuamore's needs, he could easily condense the scalpel and other things she wanted. Blacksmith Yi was in a semi-conscious state, but he could clearly see Ning Shuamore's every move. He always felt that Ning Shuamore was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. Ning Shuamore's treatment method was very special. Not to mention the people in this country, even Shwerilan had never seen it before. During the treatment process, she ordered Shwerilan to do this and that from time to time. Her words were crisp and clear, making it impossible for people to refuse. Shwerilan was amused, but he was willing to be her assistant. Of course, that was only if she did not order him out of the room. His gaze fell on Ning Shuamore from time to time. He vaguely felt that his Momo had changed after he was reincarnated. They would become stronger, more self-centered, and more carefree. Perhaps it was due to the environment, but in the previous life, Shui Yimo was somewhat gloomy. Her temperament was also unstable, and she had a kind of numbness that went with the flow. But in this life, she was much more lively and cheerful. In her previous life, she would either smile when she was socializing, sneering, or smiling out of boredom. She had never seen her smile from the bottom of her heart. However, in this life, he had seen her laugh a few times. She laughed heartily, laughed freely, and even laughed without a care in the world. However, her sincere smiles were not brought to her by him, and the character she was smiling at was not him. In her dreams, when she was with Shinjoli, there were many times when she smiled sincerely, which he had never seen when she was by his side. Some things couldn't be thought about. Once you thought about it, you would find it hard to calm down, and you would be upset and irritable. Shwerilan secretly took a breath and suppressed the tumbling emotions in his chest. On the surface, he was calm and collected, but secretly, he had been paying attention to her. Even if she wanted to play tricks, she would not be able to find a chance to do so. The operation was finally completed smoothly. Casting Master Yi's almost broken arm was finally successfully reconnected by Ning Shuamore. According to Ning Shuamore, as long as he recuperated for half a year, his arm would be as good as before. Casting Master Yi was very excited. In the end, he left with gratitude. Chapter 1180. When Blacksmith Yi went in, he was carried in, but when he came out, he walked out on his own. In the eyes of the people waiting below, this was a miracle. Even after Blacksmith Yi left, Shwerilan still didn't find out what Ning Shuamore was up to. He didn't want to stay in the store any longer, so he brought Ning Shuamore back that very night. In the Immortal Kingdom, Ning Shuamore's fame as a nameless divine doctor became even more resounding and bright. After a few days, almost the entire kingdom knew about her. She became the topic of conversation in the streets, restaurants, and tea houses. Shwerilan found that after Ning Shuamore went out, she became much more lively. She was no longer as lifeless as before. To prevent the same thing from happening again, after he brought her back to the barrier, he unsealed her acupoints to recover her mental power. Since his skills were much higher than hers, even if she recovered, she wouldn't be his opponent. More importantly, without him leading the way, she wouldn't be able to leave. He also knew that Ning Shuamore was an expert in breaking barriers, so the barriers he set up were of the highest level. After Shwerilan recovered his memories from his past life, his skills also recovered. Now, his skills weren't much worse than Shinjoli's. His ability to set up barriers was especially outstanding. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to break the barrier on Heavenly Sound Peak in time and save Ning Shuamore from Wumo's hands. Of course, to be safe, he set up layers of barriers. Even if Ning Shuamore broke one of them, there was still a second barrier to stop her. No matter which barrier was broken, he could quickly sense it and quickly rush over. He also threatened Ning Shuamore. If he found out that she was breaking barriers, he would cancel her benefits of going out twice a year. Ning Shuamore never fought an unprepared battle. Before she had full confidence, she wouldn't act blindly. After returning, she began to cultivate diligently. Now, she was already at the 7.5 level of the Earth rank. As long as she reached the 8th level, she would be able to find a way to truly break through his 2 layers of enchantments and directly escape. Before that, as long as Shwerilan didn't cross her bottom line, she wouldn't cross his bottom line either. Shwerilan's barrier was quite abundant in spiritual energy, so it didn't delay Ning Shuamore's cultivation. It was only at this moment that Ning Shuamore realized how difficult it was to advance from level 7 to level 8. Back then, Yelu Jing'an had once told her that even if he had risen from the 7th level to the 8th level, it had still taken him a full 50 years, and he had even been hailed as the fastest leveler in the Tianxi continent. It was unknown how many people were stuck at this level, unable to break through until the day they died. This was like an insurmountable natural moat. Once he crossed it, it would be a smooth journey. Ning Xuemore was cultivating here. Firstly, there wasn't a good teacher to guide her. Secondly, the little lowly in her body had recently shown signs of awakening. As long as her mind was slightly shaken, the little lowly's voice would ring in her ears like a demon's voice, causing her to be impetuous, and the speed of her cultivation naturally slowed down by a lot. Time flew by like a shuttle, and time was like lightning. Unknowingly, 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, Shui Ilan could be considered to have kept his promise. Every year, he would bring her out twice, to different continents, different places. There were some places that Ning Xuemore had followed the great god to, and some places that she had never been to before. The local conditions and customs were completely different. The only place that they didn't go was the place that she wanted to go the most in the Tianxi continent. These times, most of them were just for a day's stroll. The chance encounter that Ning Xuemore was looking forward to didn't happen. Chapter 1181. Ning Xuemore did not hear any news about Shenjiuli in the restaurants and tea houses. 10 years of life and death, it was unforgettable if one did not think about it. Ning Xuemore never thought that she would be separated from the great god for such a long time. She did not even know if the great god was alive or dead. She did not know if he was alive or dead, and he probably did not know if she was alive or dead either. The little lowly in her body had been jumping around in her mind recently, saying that she, the heavenly Lone Star, had cursed the people closest to her to death. She wanted to pull it out from her body and smash it into pieces. Ning Xuemore was not someone to be trifled with. When the little lowly in her body was talking nonsense with her, Ning Xuemore sneered, "If the heavenly Lone Star is cursed to the people closest to her, then why don't you die? Shouldn't you be the one who should be cursed to death?" This sentence finally made the little lowly in her body shut up for a few days, and Ning Xuemore finally had a period of peace. When it was close to the 10th year, Ning Xuemore's psychokinesis finally reached the critical point of Earth rank level 7 to level 8. She did not know why, but when she reached this point, she seemed to be unable to find a way to increase her psychokinesis, and stopped at the critical point. Her heart was anxious, and she often felt like her period was coming. She could not help but get angry, cry, and throw tantrums for no reason. Sometimes, she even wanted to make a scene out of hysteria, and even wanted to commit suicide. Even Shui Ilan didn't dare to provoke her rashly. He didn't want her to break down and do something to harm herself. He originally brought Ning Xuemore out every June. This time, he probably wanted to help her get rid of her depression, so he actually brought her out in March. The place they went to was the place Ning Xuemore yearned for day and night, Tianxi continent. When she saw the familiar buildings, the familiar city walls, and the familiar streets, Ning Xuemore felt her legs trembling. 10 years. She had left this place for 10 years. She never thought that she would miss a place so much. It was even more intense than a wanderer missing home. Shui Ilan brought her to the vast Sky Empire's capital. 10 years ago, she had transmigrated here and started her adventure. She had met many people and experienced a lot of things. It was also here that she had her first encounter with Shenjiuli and the enmity that followed. She had been locked up by Shui Ilan for 10 whole years. Many things could happen in 10 years. For example, when Ning Xuemore came here this time, Lehin Thai died and a new emperor ascended the throne. Tea houses, restaurants, tea houses, and post stations were all gossipy places. Everywhere, people were talking about this. Ning Xuemore only drank a few cups of tea in the tea house, and such gossip filled her ears. It was said that the crown prince, Ji Yunhuang, who was the pride of the entire vast Sky Empire, seemed to have gone crazy after the death of his wife. He ran all over the continent, looking for a way to revive the dead. His whereabouts were unknown, and he often lost contact with them. He did not care about the affairs of vast sky empire anymore. This made Lehin Thai very angry. He sent countless people to find this crown prince and told him that if he continued to be crazy, he would remove his position as crown prince. However, Ji Yunhuang did not care and did not have any intention of coming back. This made Lehin Thai so angry that he almost had a stroke. Fortunately, the sixth prince, Ji Yunhao, often treated him well and helped him share many of the country's affairs. This also made Lehin Thai pay attention to his son again. According to the news from the palace, Lehin Thai had the intention to change the crown prince, adding a chapter for the monthly ticket. Chapter 1182. However, before the imperial edict to appoint a new crown prince could be passed down, Lehin Thai suddenly fell ill and died. Ji Yunhao was originally a man of great talent and bold vision. In the past 10 years, he had nurtured many henchmen and more than half of the court officials were under his influence. With Lehin Thai's death and Ji Yunhuang's disappearance, the successor to the throne naturally fell on Ji Yunhao. The day that Ning Xuemore arrived was the day of Ji Yunhao's coronation. All the citizens of the city went to watch Ji Yunhao's coronation. It was said that the coronation was very grand and solemn. However, Ning Xuemore did not have any interest in watching it. When the people in the tea house discussed this grand occasion, their saliva naturally flew everywhere. Of course, when they mentioned Ji Yunhuang, they could not help but shake their heads. He was obviously a heaven-gifted genius, but who would have thought that he would be destroyed in the hands of a cauldron? It seems that when Lord Heavenly Teacher bestowed Tian Xueqing to the original crown prince, it was a disaster. Someone sighed. That's right. If it was not for that Tian Xueqing, the original crown prince would not have gone crazy. The one ascending the throne right now might be Her Highness Yun Huang. Someone added. Sure, don't talk about national affairs. You don't want to live anymore. Someone stopped him in a low voice. His tone was filled with panic and fear. Ning Xuemore sat there and listened without saying a word. She did not know what she was feeling in her heart. Ji Yunhuang was her friend. She thought that Tian Xueqing's death would at most be a heavy blow to him and that he would at most be depressed for 1 or 2 years before recovering. However, she did not expect that the ending would be like this. This ending was probably something that Tian Xueqing did not expect, right? On the other hand, Ji Yunhao had benefited from it and obtained the throne for nothing. Seeing your friend fall to this state, you must feel bad, right? If you hadn't met Ji Yunhuang back then, he wouldn't have fallen in love with you. If he didn't fall in love with you, Shenjiuli wouldn't have forced Tian Xueqing onto him. He also wouldn't have found Shui Mo, who was similar to you, to fall in love with him and make Tian Xueqing feel even more hopeless. I heard that Tian Xueqing died to save Shui Mo. TSK, after all these chain of events, the main culprit is still you, Ning Xuemore. Your fate as a jinx has trapped everyone close to you. You can only get rid of this fate if you turn into a demon. The little lowly in her mind began to chatter again. Ning Xuemore fiercely gulped down a mouthful of tea. She wished she could drown the little lowly in her stomach. This damned heart demon was simply trying to push all kinds of shit onto her head, constantly trying to seduce her into becoming a demon, but she just had to listen. In order to divert her attention, she went to listen to those people's gossip. By the way, I wonder if Lord Di-Zun will come this time? Someone suddenly asked. Ning Xuemore's heart suddenly jumped. In 10 years, this was the first time she heard news about him. She couldn't help but perk up her ears, afraid that she would miss a word. He should come, right? Lord Di-Zun usually comes to Changkong country once every 18 years. Moreover, when the new emperors of the 5 countries ascend the throne, Lord Di-Zun will appear once. Lord Di-Zun sees Changkong country in a new light. This time, he will definitely come for such a big event. By the way, 8 years ago, when the new emperor of Xianming country ascended the throne, Lord Di-Zun went. This time, he will definitely come. Really? Then we are in for a treat. I only heard that Lord Di-Zun came once 10 years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him at that time. This time, I hope to see him once, even if I have to kneel until my knees break." The people at the neighboring table were discussing spiritedly. Chapter 1183. Ning Xuemo's heart couldn't stop shaking as she listened. 8 years ago, the ancestor went to Xianming country. Was it Shenjiuli or the fake Wu Mo? Who would appear this time? If something really happened to Shenjiuli, wouldn't the entire Tianxi continent be in turmoil? But now, he seemed to be very peaceful. He should be fine. If he was safe, why didn't he look for her? Was he seriously injured? He was secretly recuperating in a place. On the surface, he let Wu Mo take his place to guard the Tianxi continent, but if he was only seriously injured, even if he couldn't move, he would send the Sun Moon sect's disciples to look for her. But she didn't seem to hear any news about this. Could it be that he hasn't come back yet? Thousands of questions hovered in Ning Xuemo's mind, but she couldn't find an answer. Shui Yilan sat next to her and watched her fingers unconsciously clench the teacup so tightly that even her fingernails turned white. He put his hand on Ning Xuemo's shoulder and asked, "Momo, are you nervous?" Ning Xuemo ignored him and just brushed his hand away. Shui Yilan suddenly leaned close to her ear and said, "Momo, the ancestor will pass by here later. Maybe he will come to this tea house and sit down. Do you want to meet him directly?" Ning Xuemo still didn't speak. For the past 10 years, she had been trapped in the barrier. Although she came out a few times, Shui Yilan sealed her mute acupoint every time. She couldn't talk to anyone. Inside the barrier, she had changed 3 batches of maidservants, and each batch was made mute by Shui Yilan. They couldn't talk to her. The only person she could talk to was Shui Yilan, but she didn't want to talk to him. So, for the past 10 years, Ning Xuemo rarely spoke. In total, she didn't speak 30 to 40 sentences. She almost couldn't communicate with people anymore. At this moment, both of them were still in disguise. This time, Shui Yilan was a little immoral. He disguised her as a sickly girl with a face full of pockmarks and yellow hair, while he himself was still a graceful young man. Shui Yilan relied on his high telekinesis and was too lazy to disguise himself. He only used a kind of camouflage to hide his true appearance. However, the people outside still saw him as a handsome man who was hard to find in heaven and earth. After sitting here for an hour, who knew how many young girls were secretly throwing flirtatious glances at him? Some even deliberately came over to strike up a conversation. However, Shui Yilan didn't pay any attention to those girls. All of his energy was focused on Ning Xuemo. From time to time, he would serve her tea and snacks. He sat beside her in an extremely intimate manner, as if she was a treasure that he was holding in the palm of his hand and protecting. That affectionate look made countless passers-by envious. This also made those young girls jealous. They didn't understand why such a handsome young man in front of them would fall in love with such an ugly girl. However, that ugly girl kept a cold face and didn't seem to care about her lover. This made those young girls who were secretly watching even more indignant. In their eyes, Shui Yilan was a fresh flower and Ning Xuemo was a pile of cow dung. Now, this fresh flower stuck in cow dung was enough to make people feel aggrieved. However, this cow dung still pretentiously avoided the fresh flower, probably because someone didn't like it. Another bold and beautiful young girl came over to strike up a conversation with Shui Yilan. She sat beside Shui Yilan and coquettishly asked Shui Yilan if he could buy her a drink. Chapter 1184. Shui Yilan looked at Ning Xuemo beside him. His heart skipped a beat, and he smiled gently at the young girl. His smile was as light as a flower blooming, sure. He poured her a cup of tea. The young girl was flattered. She took a sip of tea in a very ladylike manner, and then tried to strike up a conversation with Shui Yilan. Shui Yilan casually dealt with her while secretly observing Ning Xuemo's complexion. He wanted to see if there was anything strange about her face. However, He didn't expect that Ning Shuamore didn't notice him at all. Their table was next to the window, and her eyes were looking out of the window. Her gaze was empty. He didn't know what she was thinking. Shui Yilan suddenly felt his interest waning. He secretly clenched his fists. The current Ning Shuamore was exactly like the Shui Mo of his previous life. Gloomy, calm, as if she didn't care about anything. She hid all her thoughts in her heart, making it impossible for people to guess what she was thinking. Ancestor. Ancestor has come. Ancestor has really appeared. Suddenly, an excited cry came from downstairs. In an instant, the whole tea house boiled over. Ning Shuamore, who had been lost in thought, suddenly straightened her body. The teacup in her hand shook, spilling tea all over her hand. Shui Yilan's eyes darkened. He raised his hand and took out a handkerchief from who knows where to wipe the tea stains on her hand. How could you be so careless? Although he was reprimanding her, his movements were gentle, as if the slightest bit of force would bruise her delicate skin. The tea was quite hot. It scalded her fingertips, but she didn't seem to feel it. She acted as if she hadn't heard Shui Yilan's reprimand. Her gaze continued to look down. No matter where Ancestor appeared, he wouldn't give advance notice. He would always appear suddenly. Of course, no matter where he appeared, he would cause a great sensation. This time was the same. Just like what Ning Shuamore had seen 10 years ago, the group of people escorting Ancestor's sedan seemed to emerge from the ground and slowly walked through the spacious street below. Wherever he went, people would fall to their knees. Everything seemed to be a repeat of the events from 10 years ago. Even the children and maids were wearing the same clothes, and the extravagance was the same. Ning Shuamore watched as the extremely noble carriage slowly moved forward under the escort of the crowd. She suddenly felt like she was reliving the old days. Her fingers slowly tightened around the teacup. She looked at the carriage and slightly lowered her eyes. It's not him. It wasn't him in the carriage. The one sitting inside should be the fake overlord, Wu Mo. Although the curtains of the carriage were heavy, Ning Shuamore relied on her keen sixth sense to come to this conclusion. Her gaze once again fell upon the carriage, and a cold glint flashed in her eyes. 10 years ago, this Wu Mo plotted against her and almost caused her to lose her life. Because of this, she fell into the hands of Shui Yilan and was imprisoned for 10 years. He caused her to be so miserable, but he still leisurely acted as his fake overlord. It seemed that he didn't receive any punishment. It seemed that the matter of him plotting against her was covered up by him. That's why he could still live so comfortably. However, she was trapped in hell. Sooner or later, she would get back at him for this. Probably because her gaze was too intense, Wu Mo, who was in the passing carriage, felt his heart tremble slightly. He raised his head and looked towards Ning Shuamore's direction. Ning Shuamore was sitting on the second floor of the tea house. The window was half open. Ning Shuamore only revealed a small part of her body. From Wu Mo's direction, he could only see her pockmarked face. Chapter 1185. Although Ning Shuamore's martial arts were sealed, her senses were still sharp. She immediately sensed Wu Mo's probing gaze and changed her expression. She looked down curiously. One had to admit that Shui Yilan's disguise technique was very good. Wu Mo looked at Ning Shuamore a few times but still couldn't see through her disguise. Seeing that she was an ugly woman with an ordinary face, Wu Mo didn't take it to heart and continued to meditate with his eyes closed. Di Zun's carriage finally disappeared at the other end of the long street. The tea house returned to its previous lively state. Everyone was talking about the purpose of Di Zun's visit. Naturally, they were in high spirits. Ning Shuamore was also somewhat dispirited, but she still listened to the people's discussion. She wanted to gather some information about Di Zun from their nonsense. However, she was soon disappointed. Di Zun had always been very mysterious. He came and went like a ghost. Moreover, he had a substitute. Most people didn't know his true face. They didn't even know who was the real Di Zun, let alone other things. According to them, Di Zun had appeared 3 times in the past 10 years. Each time, he came and went like this. Most people didn't even see a corner of his clothes. Ning Xuemo listened for a long time but still couldn't gather the information she wanted. She couldn't help but feel disappointed. It seemed that it would be difficult to get accurate information about Shenjiuli as long as she didn't escape from Shui Yilan's control. This time, she could only rely on herself. Ning Xuemo had been trapped in the enchantment for the first year. Every day, she hoped that Shenjiuli would come down from the sky and save her. She hoped that he would tell her that he was fine. Then, she waited year after year. The more she waited, the more disappointed she became. The more she waited, the more anxious and desperate she became. But now, she was suddenly frightened. She had always been independent. When did she become like a dodder flower and depend on others? She had to rely on herself. The most important thing now was to break through to level 8. Only by breaking through to level 8 could she escape from Shui Yilan's imprisonment. However, her psychokinesis suddenly stopped advancing. It was stuck there. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break through. She became a little impatient again and slammed her teacup on the table, startling the beautiful girl who was chatting with Shui Yilan. That young girl took advantage of the pleasant conversation she had with Shui Yilan and felt that this handsome man in front of her was quite fond of her, so she didn't put this ugly girl, Ning Xuemo, in her eyes. Seeing Ning Xuemo holding the teacup, she thought that Ning Xuemo was jealous. She couldn't help but curl her lips. Oh, is this big sister angry? Ning Xuemo glanced at her. She had no idea what she was talking about, so she didn't bother to pay attention to it. Seeing that Ning Xuemo didn't say anything, the young girl felt that she was easy to bully. She continued, "Big sister, you have such a good husband. It's a blessing from your previous life. But the young master is such an excellent person. It's impossible for him to marry only one. Moreover, big sister's appearance is so ordinary. You shouldn't be jealous." The young girl spoke with assurance, as if she was a woman who adhered to the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Ning Xuemo looked at her as if she was crazy. She then looked at Shui Yilan. Shui Yilan crossed his arms and looked at them with a faint smile. It was obvious that he was watching the show. Ning Xuemo couldn't speak. She was too lazy to argue with this infatuated young girl. She looked away and looked out of the window again, thinking about her next move. Chapter 1186. The girl was completely ignored by Ning Xuemo. She couldn't help but get angry. Her pretty face tensed up. What? Is this sister disdaining to talk to me? Ning Xuemo still ignored her. The girl was finally angry. She slammed her palm on the table. You ugly girl, why are you so arrogant? Her action was not small. Almost everyone in the tea house was alarmed. Countless pairs of eyes looked at Ning Xuemo's table. Ning Xuemo finally turned around. Her gaze fell on the girl's face. Then, she picked up the cup of tea on the table and raised it to the girl. The girl thought that Ning Xuemo was finally frightened by her and apologized to her with tea instead of wine. She was even more proud. She snorted coldly, "You are so rude. You want to toast me with a cup of tea? Forget it." Before she could finish her sentence, a cup of hot tea was poured directly on her head. The girl screamed and jumped up with tea juice on her head. "You, bitch." She seemed to want to scold Ning Xuemo. However, in front of Shui Yilan, she suddenly remembered that she had to take care of her image. She immediately turned to Shui Yilan and cried, "Master, look at her. She's too bitchy." Shui Yilan looked at her. "You mean she's too bitchy?" Yes, she's just like a bitch." The girl's voice was full of grievances. Shui Yilan slowly picked up the teapot on the table and slowly poured the whole pot of tea on the girl's head. "I think she should be more bitchy." The tea seemed to have just been boiled. The girl was crying like a ghost and howling like a wolf after being scalded. However, her body seemed to be fixed. She couldn't escape at all. Shui Yilan finished pouring the whole pot of tea on her head. Then, he waved his sleeve like he was swatting a fly. "Get lost." Thus, Before the young girl, who was scalded to death, could react, she had already flown out of the window and landed on the street. Shwer Elan's display of strength shocked everyone present. The other girls who were envious of the bold girl who was able to chat with the handsome man immediately kept quiet out of fear. They no longer dared to have any thoughts of striking up a conversation. Shwer Elan sat down again. His gaze fell on Ning Shuamor's face, and he smiled like a spring breeze. "Wife, I've wronged you just now. Come, have some desserts to cool down." Him calling her wife successfully gave Ning Shuamor goosebumps all over her body. She didn't know what was wrong with Shwer Elan this time, but he kept calling her wife in front of and behind her back. She couldn't refute him, so she simply ignored him. She didn't eat the dessert that Shwer Elan handed to her. Instead, she took another piece and ate slowly. Shwer Elan didn't get angry. With a smile, he brought the plate of desserts to her. "Wife, if you like to eat these, then eat more." Ning Shuamor was annoyed by the public display of affection in front of others. She was about to stand up and walk down when she suddenly seemed to be fixed by something. Her entire body froze there. The shopkeeper exclaimed from downstairs, "Celestial Master Han, Aya, it's Celestial Master Han. Celestial Master Han, your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. Please, please." Then, a gentle female voice was heard. "Sir, the tea here is not bad. The desserts are also exquisite. The scenery is not bad. Let's go up and have a seat." This voice belonged to the fairy, Yunshi. "Celestial Master Han? Celestial Master Han? Could it be? Could it be?" Ning Shuamor's body froze. The blood in her body rushed to her head, causing her ears to ring. Chapter 1187. Ning Shuamor's heart was beating like thunder at this moment. She opened her eyes wide and looked at the stairs. Her palm suddenly hurt and her whole body went soft. She couldn't help but sit down and almost sat on Shwer Elan's body. Shwer Elan pulled her into his embrace and said with a smile, "Wife, don't be angry. Let your husband feed you, okay?" Ning Shuamor's pressure points were sealed by him and she couldn't move at all. Moreover, when Shwer Elan hugged her in his embrace, her back was facing the stairs. She couldn't see that place anymore. At this moment, she wanted to slap Shwer Elan to death. She looked at the culprit with a pair of eyes that seemed to be spitting fire. Shwer Elan smiled gracefully. "Wife, are you angry that your husband was hit on by someone just now?" "Wife, don't worry. I have no interest in other women. I only love you." He chattered endlessly in Ning Shuamor's ear, spouting sweet nothings. His devilish voice pierced through Ning Shuamor's ears, causing her to momentarily be unable to hear the commotion at the top of the stairs. She was very anxious and wanted to prick her ears like a fox to listen. She wanted to tell Shwer Elan to shut up, but she couldn't make a sound. Everyone's attention was originally on Ning Shuamor's table, but when the people who came up the stairs entered, everyone held their breath. What a perfect couple. This was everyone's first reaction when they saw the two people who came in. The guests who came in were a man and a woman. The woman was wearing a snow-white dress. Her face was like a spring flower. Her movements were elegant and calm, with an inexplicable noble air. The man was wearing a moonlight robe. The corner of his robe was painted with a mountain rock and a cold moon. Although his appearance couldn't be seen clearly, his aura was like the clouds in the sky. It made people feel that it was blasphemous to look at him. It was the elusive Master Han Shanyu. 10 years ago, Han Shanyu was worshipped by Lehin Thai as the heavenly master of the vast sky empire. His grand ceremony of worshipping the heavens stunned the citizens of vast sky empire. This great master came and went without a trace. The last time the people of vast sky empire saw him was 10 years ago at the crown prince's wedding. After that, no one knew where he went. Even when it was widely rumored that Ning Shuamor had been killed by the devil dwellers in the Sun-Moon sect, this grandmaster did not appear again. Until 8 years ago, someone saw his whereabouts in the Feishing kingdom. However, he only appeared for half a day and disappeared again. When Lehin Thai heard that he had appeared, he had sent someone to invite him to save his crazy son. However, he did not expect that before the messenger had even arrived, the master had disappeared again. Now that Lehin Thai had passed away and a new emperor had ascended the throne, what was the purpose of this master's appearance? The people of Vast Sky Empire had a strange feeling towards this great Master Han. Originally, they worshipped him as if he was a god and everyone was full of pride. Now that these people thought about the Crown Prince's ending, it seemed that it was related to this great master. Therefore, although they still worshipped this great master as if he was a god, there was still some resentment. Some people subconsciously bowed to him, while others lowered their heads and drank tea, pretending that they did not see him. It was also because of this that Shue Ilan and Ning Xuemor were still sitting there. It did not seem strange. Although Ning Xuemor could not see or hear Shinjoli, she could roughly guess from the reactions of the people around her. Her heart was burning. There were a few times when she wanted to turn around, but her neck was stiff and she could not turn around. Chapter 1188. Momo, be good. Otherwise, I'll take you away from here. Shue Ilan sent her a telepathic message. He picked up another pastry and fed it to her. His voice was so gentle that it was almost dripping water. Come, my wife. Try this. The pastry was as sweet as honey and melted instantly in her mouth. But what about her heart? Ning Xuemor wanted to cut Shue Ilan into pieces. This bastard is doing this on purpose. The more anxious I am, the more mischievous he is. Ning Xuemor suddenly stopped struggling. Her body relaxed completely and she even swallowed the pastry that he fed her. Shue Ilan looked down at her and continued to send her a telepathic message. That's a good girl. As long as you're good, I'll take you out a few more times in the future. Ning Xuemor ate the pastry slowly and activated all her organs to sense the direction of Shinjoli and the others. Sir, the cloud tea here tastes really good. Would you like to order a pot to try? Yunchi's voice was gentle and elegant. Oh. Ning Xuemor finally heard Shinjoli say a word. This word made her heart beat violently. It's him. It's really him. It can't be wrong. After 10 years, she finally heard his voice again. Although it was just a short word, it made her want to cry instantly. She didn't know whether he was alive or not for 10 years. Now, she finally heard his voice again. He's still alive. He's still alive. He's still alive. This was Ning Xuemor's thought at this moment. She wanted to turn around again, but Shue Ilan raised his hand and held her chin. He looked into her eyes and asked her affectionately, "Is it good?" Ning Xuemor. She suddenly coughed and spat out the pastry in her mouth. It almost sprayed onto Shue Ilan's face. Shue Ilan raised his sleeve and gently wiped the pastry crumbs off his face. He sent her a telepathic message. Are you angry? You did it on purpose. Ning Xuemor looked at him provocatively. That's right, she did it on purpose. She just wanted to spit on his face. Shue Ilan sighed softly and said in a soft voice, "You don't have to feel guilty. I don't care." This time, he said it directly, as if he was speaking to everyone in the tea house. In the tea house, a few people who had been paying attention to Shue Ilan looked over. They admired him when they saw the half-eaten dessert on his face. This man really doted on his ugly wife. His ugly wife was really blessed. Shue Ilan's voice was neither loud nor quiet, so it naturally reached Shinjoli and Yunchi's ears. Yunchi had always thought highly of herself. Although she appeared gentle and generous on the surface, she actually looked down on ordinary people. Shue Ilan had concealed his and Ning Xuemor's aura, so she couldn't recognize them. Yunchi was used to being the center of attention wherever she went, and this time was no different. She hadn't expected that her and Shinjoli's limelight would be stolen by a mortal couple. Therefore, she also glanced at Shue Ilan's table. She only saw Shue Ilan's handsome and tall back, while the woman in his arms only revealed half of her body. Furthermore, her back was facing Yunchi, so she couldn't see how ugly she was. She only faintly felt that the woman seemed a little thin and small. This pair of mortal husband and wife were very loving. Weren't they offending public decency by cuddling together while drinking tea here? Yunqi snorted and looked at Shenjioli, who was sitting opposite her. Shenjioli gently turned the teacup in his hand. His expression was indifferent, as if he was isolated from the mortal world. The commotion caused by Shui Ilan's table only made him glance at it. He then looked away, obviously not taking it to heart. My dear friends, please don't be impatient. Although the content of this book is a little similar to that of My Lazy Little Demon Concubine, the content is definitely different. The development trend is also different. It will make you feel especially good. It will make you want to cry and laugh at the same time. My dear friends, are you looking forward to it? Chapter 1189. Yunqi would talk to him softly, and he would occasionally respond. The two of them seemed to be getting along very well. Ning Xuemo had been listening attentively to Shenjioli's table. After the initial surprise, her heart was filled with doubts. If the Almighty was safe and sound, why hadn't he come looking for her all these years? Could it be that he couldn't find her? Or, although Shui Ilan had hidden her extremely well, with the Almighty's abilities, it shouldn't be that he couldn't find her even after 10 years, right? Now, he was with Yunqi again, leisurely drinking tea here. Ha ha ha, men are like this. No matter how good a relationship is, it can't withstand the test of time. He probably forgot about you already, right? You're the only one who's still thinking about him like a fool, waiting for him to come and save you like a knight. The little lowly in her mind began to speak again. Shut up. He wouldn't forget about me, Ning Xuemo reprimanded in her mind. Don't try to sow discord here. It must be something I don't know about. Maybe he hadn't stopped looking for her for the past 10 years, or maybe he just couldn't find her, or maybe Shui Ilan had purposely made up news of her death. Maybe he had even gotten a fake corpse for the Sun Moon sect to claim and deceive everyone. When the Almighty returned, he might have received news that she was already dead. Time was the best medicine for all wounds. Maybe he had been extremely sad when he first received news of her death, but after 10 years, his sadness had faded and he had gotten over it. All sorts of guesses whizzed through Ning Xuemo's mind. She had come up with dozens of reasons for him, all of which seemed to be valid and yet none of which seemed to be valid. Her heart felt like it was being pressed down by a huge rock, but it also felt like it was burning with a ball of fire and a block of ice. She couldn't describe the feeling. She felt like a pot of boiling oil in her chest. She wanted to jump in front of Shenjioli and grab his collar to interrogate him, but she also wanted to throw herself into his arms. Your hands and feet are so cold. Are you feeling unwell? Shui Ilan held her small hands and asked considerately. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes. Her current state made her want to vomit blood. Come, have some hot tea to warm yourself up. Shui Ilan brought a cup of tea to her lips. Ning Xuemo's eyes darkened. The only thing she could move now was her mouth. Her mouth could only eat and drink, but she couldn't make a sound. She seemed to have accepted her fate. As expected, she lowered her head slightly and leaned closer to the cup of tea. She took a small sip from it. Shui Ilan looked at her with a smile. He seemed to appreciate her helpless and frantic look, but a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. Suddenly, Ning Xuemo shook her head violently, and her mouth hit the teacup. This time, she used all the strength she could muster. Shui Ilan was obviously caught off guard. The teacup in his hand was knocked over by her and fell to the ground. Pa! The teacup was smashed into smithereens. This movement wasn't small. Especially in this quiet place, it was even more shocking. Almost everyone's gaze was on Shui Ilan's table. Shenjioli was no exception. He also glanced at Shui Ilan and even looked at Ning Xuemo, who was in his arms. Ning Xuemo used a lot of strength. Her teeth hurt from the impact. This was the biggest movement she could make. She hoped that Shenjioli would look over here, even if it was just a glance. Although she was in disguise, Shui Ilan wasn't. He was only using a camouflage. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.